In the 1999 Alexander Payne film Election, starring Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon, our lead character Jim McAllister, a high school history teacher, asks his students to explain the difference between morals and ethics. A couple of students give half-right answers, and when Tracy Flick, his least favorite student, answers, Mr. McAllister's voiceover interrupts her explanation. The movie never truly tells us what it thinks the difference is, and other characters also question if there even is a difference.
I don't need a lecture on ethics, okay?
I'm not talking about ethics, I'm talking about morals.
What's the difference?
According to Britannica, morality and ethics often overlap, morality pertaining more to the individual rather than the community. Psychology Today describes ethics as concerned with rights, responsibilities, use of language, what it means to live an ethical life, and how people make moral decisions. Very Well Mind says that scholars and researchers don't really establish a difference between ethics and morals because they are basically the same, though ethics is more commonly associated with certain professions like journalism and medicine. Doctors are required to take the Hippocratic Oath, and journalists are expected to follow journalistic ethics when reporting. Ethics and morality can vary from person to person and often relate to the social mores, conventions, and laws of a specific period in time. Having a baby out of wedlock was once seen as shameful, and children who were what they called illegitimate weren't even allowed to receive inheritance and were not afforded the same protections as legitimate children. At its worst, this stigma around illegitimate children unveils some of America's darkest and criminally underdiscussed history of sterilization. In 1927, an 18-year-old woman by the name of Carrie Buck was forcefully sterilized after giving birth to an illegitimate child. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who is an associate judge on the Supreme Court and a legal scholar, said of the case, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind." Damn. Tell me how you really feel. Today it is laughable to some to think that there was so much shame and discrimination towards illegitimate children, and yet those outdated beliefs still to some extent have a long-lasting impact on the way our society views and treats single-parent households, especially single moms of color. Sometimes the ethics and morality of a certain time period don't always evaporate. Sometimes they just morph into something else less overt and extreme but still omnipresent, like slut-shaming. Something that has evolved and changed over the years, but is still pretty ubiquitous and ongoing in our society. Something that has always in some ways irked me about the ways we like to laugh at the past for their ignorance or their wild bigoted opinions, as if the present American society is some kind of utopia where white supremacy, capitalism, racism, and patriarchy has been eradicated. I suspect that laughter has died down now, considering we have just re-elected a white supremacist into office. The concept of what is right and what is wrong, what is virtue and what is vice, and what is ethically right versus what is morally right is very complicated because everyone's moral compass differs. Some people's moral compass depends almost solely on what is legal and what is illegal. Some people's moral compass centers solely around religion. In Election, when the conversation of morals versus ethics comes up, it prompts our lead protagonist, Mr. McAllister, to tell us a sordid tale revealing why Tracy Flick is his least favorite student. See, Tracy, a teenage girl, was groomed and taken advantage of by Jim's friend and former colleague, Dave Novotny. Dave was married and his wife was pregnant when he decided to begin a relationship with her. Tracy was vulnerable because she is a young girl who faces a lot of academic pressure from her single mom who is living vicariously through Tracy. Dave noticed that she didn't have any friends. He tells her how smart and attractive she is and tells her that he's there for her if she needs a friend. This leads to them having a secret affair that Tracy's mom discovers and reports to the school. Dave is quietly fired from his job and kicked out by his wife. Anyone today would argue this is immoral, as Mr. McAllister bluntly tells Dave before the downfall. At the time, however, Tracy was not seen as a victim by fans and viewers of the film, and even Mr. McAllister himself. Election is an interesting movie because the characters of Jim McAllister, Tracy Flick, and Paul Metzler are an interesting case study in misogyny, patriarchy, and the social implications of Likeability. Based on the 1998 novel of the same name by Tom Perrotta, the story centers around our four main protagonists: Mr. M, Tracy, Paul, and his little sister Tammy. Tracy, like almost every Reese Witherspoon character, is a confident, overly ambitious overachiever and honor student, in the bane of Mr. McAllister's existence. But Mr. McAllister is an unreliable narrator. He says he doesn't hate Tracy. In fact, he admires her. He really does.
Sure, she got on my nerves once in a while, but I admired Tracy. I really did.
Mr. McAllister says he loves his wife Diane and that their marriage isn't as cold and dead as it looks. He says he loves his job and loves educating students and preparing them for adulthood. But this isn't true. Mr. McAllister hates his life. He hates his wife, his job, women, and most importantly, Tracy Flick. In A.O. Scott's New York Times 20-year anniversary retrospective, What America Gets Wrong About Tracy Flick, he writes, "How despicably does a man have to behave before he forfeits our sympathy? How much does a woman, a teenage girl, have to suffer before she earns it? The results as enshrined in Tracy's status as a near-universal object of contempt, and Mr. M's as an afterthought, aren't especially edifying. Nor are they surprising." He's right. They aren't surprising. Now, someone might say, well, it was the 90s. And again, they wouldn't be totally incorrect. The You're Wrong About podcast had a whole series dedicated to unfairly maligned women of the 1990s. From Tonya Harding, Amy Fisher, Anita Hill, Monica Lewinsky, Jessica Hahn, etc., etc. The rape culture of the 1990s is something to behold. This was a time when the term date rape was so new that it baffled people, even some who called themselves feminists. Speaking of feminists, even they, including fucking Gloria Steinem, sided with Bill Clinton during the Clinton scandals, which not only included the Monica Lewinsky situation, but also 2 other women who had accused him of sexual harassment. The rape culture and anti-woman sentiment was so loud and widespread that many women were just putting their internalized misogyny on Front Street in the most shameless way. Even today, she says she doesn't regret writing in defense of him at the time, but that she feels differently now. We've had a reckoning with that era of dragging women into the spotlight, and have even made biopics that have acted in part as apologies to these women who didn't deserve what happened to them. This trend included Tracy Flick. Alright, so I slept with my English teacher and ruined his marriage. Crucify me. Send me to bad girl prison with Amy Fisher and make TV movies about my pathetic life. This passage is the first from Tom Perotta's novel that introduces us to Tracy. Like the movie, the book is told from different perspectives. In this passage, Tracy compares herself to Amy Fisher, a 17-year-old girl who was statutory raped by Joey Buttafuoco and made national headlines when she shot his wife Mary Jo in the head with the intent to kill her. Instead of criticism being aimed at Joey for not only being involved with an underage girl, but also getting Amy involved in escorting and pocketing a large percentage of the money she earned from sleeping with old-ass men, instead criticism was aimed at Amy. She was even dubbed the Long Island Lolita. Yes, he was convicted of statutory rape, but at the time, our views on consent, power dynamics, and age gaps were much more archaic than they are now, therefore making Amy the target of media scrutiny in 2 movies with Alyssa Milano and Drew Barrymore portraying Fisher. So in some ways, it makes sense that so many people overlook the actual villain in the Tracy Dave affair. How could they if they couldn't even recognize that Joey Buttafuoco was a lying predator?
Joey, he knew me casually for about a year. He knew the relationship I had with my father. You know, my father would yell at me in front of people. He knew I was vulnerable. And I think that he preyed...
You were going what?
Vulnerable.
Vulnerable, okay.
And I think he preyed upon my vulnerabilities.
The election that turned me into a car salesman took place in the spring of 1992 when Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill were still fresh in everyone's mind. And Jennifer Flowers was the momentary star of tabloids and talk shows. All year long, my junior current events class returned again and again to a single theme, what the media like to call the character issue. How are private virtue and public responsibility intertwined? Can you be an adulterer and a good president? A sexual pervert and an effective impartial member of the judiciary? Mr. M tells us that these are the kinds of questions he often thinks about. During his current events class, he and his students discuss a recent story about an intellectually disabled girl who was gang raped by a group of Golden Boy football players, who didn't deny the assault and insisted that the girl consented to it. Mr. M would like to have seen them sent to prison so that they can see what it was like to be that girl. His words, not mine. He asks his students if the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak. Lisa Flanagan raises her hand to say that Mr. M is missing the point because the strong take what they want. Mr. M thinks of himself as morally righteous. He hates Bill Clinton and Clarence Thomas for being liars who ascended politically anyway. But like in the movie, he is an unreliable narrator. He might hate Bill Clinton, but he isn't so different. He hates Tracy for what happened to his friend Dave, who was named Jack in the book, and admits to secretly envying him and that it wasn't uncommon for him and Jack to gossip about how hot their teenage girl students were. In fact, in the book, Mr. M regularly comments on his underage students' appearances, along with other staff members like the principal, who at one point tells Mr. M that Tracy has an ass so nice that it would be worth losing your job over. It was easier than you might imagine to forget she was 15. Spend enough time in high school, and you forget what 15 means. When discussing him and his wife's efforts to conceive, he says he had a hard time sustaining an erection and decided to close his eyes and fantasize about fucking Tracy under the school bleachers. In the film and the book, Mr. McAllister cheats on his wife with Dave's ex-wife, Linda, who was named Sherry in the book. The book follows the events in the book pretty closely for the most part, but one of the bigger contrasts is the affair. In the movie, Mr. McAllister and Linda make out at her house one morning before school, and it's unclear if they had sex, though I hope not, because her son was not that far from them. And before he heads off to work, they plan a date at a motel after school. Linda doesn't come though, and when he returns home, sees that Linda and her son are with his wife and has told her everything. In the book, Mr. M begins a full-on affair with Sherry, and they sleep together multiple times before she decides to tell his wife, who by the way is her son's godmother. Diane, Mr. M's wife, puts him out, but even after this revelation, he still goes and waits outside of Sherry/Linda's house in the hopes that they can start a new life together. It's hard to imagine at this remove, but by the time I pulled into Sherry's driveway around 10 o'clock, I was fairly certain we'd end up spending the night together. She'd have to come home at some point, I reasoned, and when she did, she'd have to let me in. How could she not? We were lovers now. The thing that had happened to us was too real, too powerful to deny. It was the kind of miracle you could build a life around, or so it seemed to me then. Perched on the ledge of what looked like a new beginning, but turned out to be a long way down. Linda/Sherry are on completely different wavelengths, and when Mr. M calls her during school on election day, he tells her he loves her, but she shuts him down and accuses him of taking advantage of her. Mr. M immediately places the blame on her in the book, reminding her of the time he came to her house and she answered the door wearing nothing but her ex-husband's t-shirt. In the film, he responds confused and angry as Book Jim, but says that she was the one who came on to him. That isn't untrue, but earlier in the film, while Mr. McAllister and her went shopping as his wife watched her son at home, he jokingly suggests that they get a room, which at first makes Linda uncomfortable and Mr. M feeling embarrassed. Linda does later come on to him towards the middle of the film, but in the book, his car ride is when Mr. M and Jerry sleep together for the first time. Now, why am I highlighting this distinction? After all, cheating is cheating, right? Well, yes, but there are levels to it, and I would argue Book Jim's affair puts him in a much less favorable light. To make matters worse, his wife takes him back in the book and is pregnant, and there's never any closure between them, nor is he even that apologetic about what he did. In the film, Jim McAllister is played by Matthew Broderick, aka Ferris Bueller, and his gross, creepy uncle comments about his teenage students is not present in his conversations. There's also the fact that he does nothing but lie to us during his own telling of events. But a constant through line is his obsession with positioning himself as a victim, who on some level feels he should have gotten away with what he did. But what did he do? Well, he meddled in a student election in order to deter his least favorite student, Tracy Flick, from winning. Something he describes in the book as a virtuous act that would benefit the school and not simply his own petty grudge. When Paul tells Mr. M that what those football athletes did was wrong and that they are scum, it gives him the idea to pressure Paul into running against Tracy, and following that, his little sister Tammy, who is a closeted lesbian, runs against both of them when her secret girlfriend Lisa leaves her for his brother. Tammy ends up being the wild card candidate who encourages the students not to vote or care about the election because it's all bullshit anyway. Tracy, believing she was going to win with no trouble, is now anxious that Paul's popularity as a handsome jock will win him the election. And the stress causes her to act out destructively when she tears down all of Paul's posters and pins it on Tammy, who ends up taking the fall anyway so she can go to an all-girls Catholic school for reasons.
That's where you belong. Maybe the nuns will be able to straighten you out. Is that funny? You think it's funny?
This leaves Paul and Tracy as the only two candidates. And while Tammy technically would have won by a lot if she hadn't gotten suspended, Tracy ends up winning the election by a single vote. But when Mr. M, who is tired and ragged and in a crabby mood with a swollen eye, goes to do his count and sees Tracy spying and realizes that she has learned about the results, her happiness angers him so much that he throws away 2 of Tracy's votes so that Paul will win. After all is said and done and Mr. M's misdeeds are brought to light via the janitor who found the ballots, he is pretty much forgiven by his past students in the book, and at the end, Tracy shows up at the car dealership he now works at, and the two make amends. What Mr. M did may not seem like a big deal, but there's a lot more going on than a teacher meddling in an insignificant school election. See, Larry, who works on the election committee or whatever it's called, did the first count and was confident in what he counted, and is baffled when Mr. M tells him his count was wrong. When the principal addresses the matter, Mr. M assures himself that at the end of the day, he is the teacher and Larry is the student, and it'll be his word against his. Mr. M recognizes his own power as an authority figure, used it to his advantage, and then gaslighted a teenager because he knew the principal would take his word over his. As A.O. Scott says, yes, Tracy does some unethical stuff, but Mr. McAllister's actions are immoral. Even though certain aspects of Mr. M's character are watered down in a sense, the movie doesn't let him off the hook. The film's ending is probably the biggest deviation from the book. Instead of going back to his wife and starting a family as a car salesman, his wife divorces him, leaves him with the car, and the story of what he did spreads around town, making him enemy number one. So he up and moves to New York, gets a new girlfriend in an overly priced shoebox apartment, and begins volunteering as an instructor at a museum for students on field trips. One day, while strolling through the city, he sees Tracy from across the street with a Republican congressman and stands frozen as they get into a limo. As he stands there, he contemplates confronting her about the posters that he knows she tore down, and says that he feels sorry for her actually. And what a pity it is that she's still getting up every morning and pursuing her pathetic little dreams. My favorite line in a movie ever.
Probably still getting up at 5 in the morning to pursue her pathetic little dreams. It just makes me sad.
The limo passes him, and Jim wonders, who the fuck did this bitch think she is? So he throws his Coca-Cola at the limo and then dips. The final scene ends on a bleak reminder that Mr. M has not learned a single thing. He asks the students what the difference is between igneous and sedimentary, and ignores a female student who reminds him of Tracy. Even over a year after the election, he still tries to code his hatred of Tracy as something based on morality. She is wrong because she tore down Paul's posters, but that's not really why Mr. McAllister is mad, and we know that. Earlier in the movie, Mr. McAllister and Tracy share a conversation when he calls her in for questioning about Paul's posters. Tracy, as I said before, denies that she did it, but Mr. M doesn't trust her and tells her that even though she's very intelligent, there's more to life than doing whatever she can to succeed, like stepping on other people to do so. And in the end, you're only cheating yourself. In another circumstance, I wouldn't totally disagree, but this comment is not coming from a good place. It's coming from a place of resentment and insecurity. After this, he passive-aggressively alludes to Dave's situation and subtly blames her for what happened. He goes on to tell her, certain young and naive people, that they should be grateful that their past indiscretions weren't made public, and that it didn't hinder their chances of winning certain elections. Tracy does put him in his place when she correctly states that teachers shouldn't be leching after their students in the first place, and then threatens to get her lawyer involved, which, even though we know she did it, he doesn't have any proof or witnesses, so good for her. What I love about this conversation is what Mr. McAllister says to her. He feels that Tracy's reputation should be ruined due to what happened with Mr. Novotny. He feels it should impede her opportunities, including winning an election. Jim tries to paint this as a matter of morals versus ethics, but Dave is the only one in that situation who did something ethically and morally wrong. In the book, he describes Tracy as dangerous, but how is she dangerous? Because she's smart, driven, ambitious, and maybe a little irritating? This hatred he has is more about the fact that he feels it is unfair that Tracy can continue to succeed after sleeping with her teacher while his friend, who not only statutory raped a teenage girl but also cheated on his pregnant wife, is fired and kicked out of his home. Jim feels it's unfair that he faced consequences for his actions because men like Bill Clinton and Clarence Thomas didn't. Illustrating his new work environment at the car dealership, he says, "When Rudy Francis starts telling me Nick jokes and Stan Unfall brags about porking his wife, when Frank Jr. slaps me on the back and calls me professor, that's when I get bitter. When I start wondering how it is that Bill Clinton got to be president and Clarence Thomas got to sit on the Supreme Court, while I ended up here, surrounded by men who have nicknames for their penises and talk about them like they're old friends. The only difference was that Bill and Clarence lied, and I told the truth." Did you, though? No, Mr. M did not insult anyone, but he is a cheater and a liar with a shaky moral compass. His attraction to Tracy and his desire to fuck her, knowing that it will never happen, is also connected to his hatred of her. But because he tells us in his own words that he admires Tracy, that he feels sorry for her, that he loves his job and his wife, and is sad at how unforgiving his wife was for almost fucking her friend at a motel, it is Tracy who most people left the theaters hating. I don't think Tracy is a nice person. In fact, she's kind of a snob, and it really shouldn't be ignored that she ends up being a Republican. But she is also a teenage girl who faces immense pressure from her mom, who blames her election loss on a lack of campaign posters. Like, bitch, she had a whole ass fucking banner. Unless we forget, she was groomed by her teacher who recognized how lonely she really was and took advantage. That is really gross, and while tearing down someone's campaign posters is really mean, and pinning it on Tammy because you know she's a troublemaker is wrong, and well, unethical, the adults in this story commit way worse acts than that. Like Mr. M, many people at the time and even now fear and deride ambitious women who are trying to succeed too much. If you couldn't tell by her wardrobe or hairstyle or how she delivers her campaign speech, Tracy is a walking, talking parody of Hillary Rodham Clinton, one of the most hated women during the 1990s. Not only are they similar in their appearance, but they both are admittedly dull and problematic people, but their male counterparts are significantly worse. Even when Bill Clinton publicly cheated on his wife for the 1000th time, men sympathize with Bill, not Hillary. He probably just gets lonely, they said, as they simultaneously and relentlessly slut-shamed Monica Lewinsky for giving him a blowjob, something most people who have sex with men do. Sure, Bill had a long history of sexual misconduct allegations and had embroiled himself in another sex scandal involving him and a very young woman who was working at the White House, but Hillary is a ball buster, and she's ugly, and her voice and her stupid pantsuits. She's so unlikable. But Bill, on the other hand, is so charismatic, and he plays that saxophone so beautifully, and hell, he's the blackest president we've ever had, according to Chris Rock. As A.O. Scott questioned earlier, how despicable does a man have to behave before he forfeits our sympathy? How much does a woman, a teenage girl, have to suffer before she earns it? Well, in the cases of Monica Lewinsky or Britney Spears or Tanya Harding, 20 to 30 years is how long before the public decides to apologize for being so stupid. The problem is that people at the time did not recognize the flaws in what they did. They felt they were morally correct in defending Bill Clinton and deriding Monica because Monica was a slut. And even though Bill was also arguably a slut and a sex pest, we cannot have sympathy for a woman who willingly gets down on her knees. I know it's frustrating when, say, women or people of color sum up certain stories or media sensations as a result of misogyny or racism. People feel that it's too simplistic or it's too obvious or it's a leap. But this failure to call a thing is why we keep repeating this cycle of uplifting, celebrating, or even sympathizing with the man who has done something objectively and morally wrong while destroying the women they have harmed. This isn't just an issue of misinterpreting a movie or misreading a power dynamic as consensual. Our feelings about Tracy say more about how our patriarchal society is set up for us to always sympathize with men, no matter what. And while we're on the subject, what's the difference between sympathy and empathy anyway? Very well, Mind defines sympathy as a superficial understanding of someone's situation. Therefore, it is easy to pass judgment. Empathy allows a person to explore another person's thoughts and feelings, which helps them remove judgment. It's so easy for people to sympathize with men accused of assault or abuse, but it doesn't translate into how they address their female victims. They are never extended the same grace. They infantilize these men and dismiss their actions as boys will be boys and offer him the benefit of the doubt, even when there is sufficient evidence that supports their victims' claims. Or in cases like Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain, or even the Will Smith slap incident, we find a woman to blame for a grown man's misbehavior. Returning to that New York Times piece by A.O. Scott, he's saying the quiet part out loud. He's indicating that he hasn't learned anything. It hasn't occurred to him that he had anything to learn. In his mind, he's still the victim, and Tracy is the cause of his misery. The disturbing thing is that it's so easy, even after everything we've witnessed, to accept his last word, to see the whole story from his point of view, even if it's been the wrong story all along. This is why I personally prefer the film's ending to the ending of the book. The very final scene, in my view at least, is the cherry on top. Jim spends the entire movie trying to find morally correct reasons to hate Tracy, and he managed to get some viewers to agree with him. But then the last scene just confirms that, yep, it was misogyny all along. It's kind of like that Key and Peele Black Ice sketch where we're meant to think that the black news hosts are misconstruing what the white reporters are saying about black ice, and then it just ends with the lady being like,
"Why is America being ruined by black people?"
Now what about Paul? Is he as gross and sexist as Mr. M? Well, no, not on the surface. On the surface, Paul is a cartoonishly nice football jock who is beloved by everyone in school. If you've seen the movie, it is hard to hate Paul. He's just so nice and likable. He's sweet. He's kind to Tracy, who hates him for being a rich kid with a big truck. He loves his little sister Tammy despite being completely oblivious to her relationship with Lisa and her sexuality. He bucks the tradition of jock characters being rapey, rage-fueled assholes. And if that isn't enough to make you love him, he resists voting for himself during the election and instead votes for Tracy. Saying that, it makes it very easy to reach the conclusion that Paul did in fact deserve to win, because unlike Tracy, he is nice. He doesn't know anything about politics, isn't as passionate about winning as Tracy is a terrible public speaker, and his girlfriend Lisa basically does all the hard work, but he's nice. Movie Paul, while nice, is in fact amoral in a lot of ways. He doesn't even have any ill will toward Mr. M and looks up to him. Under the surface, Paul is a detrimentally naive person who is way too easily swayed by other people. He doesn't stand for anything, so it's easy for Mr. M to manipulate him into running against Tracy. Paul isn't exactly at fault for the Lisa thing, so he doesn't know how bitchy Lisa was to Tammy or how she called her a lesbophobic slur.
I'm not a dick, and we're not in love.
But part of me feels like if he did find out, he would probably excuse Lisa's actions like he did with Mr. M and with everyone else, because he isn't capable of getting mad at anybody. Maybe that makes him sweet, maybe that makes him an adorable, naive baby, but that doesn't make him more fit for school president than Tracy. So Mr. M pressuring him to run and pretending as if he's doing it for the good of society or whatever, it's really just him wanting to take this hardworking, intelligent woman down a peg and using an impressionable, lovable, likable jock to do it. And Book Tracy was very well aware of this. Maybe it was Paul's sweet, handsome face, or maybe it was that stupid slogan, "We need him." Maybe it was the way he and Lisa kissed in front of everyone like they were getting nourishment from each other's tongues. Really though, it was because in spite of everything, in spite of this pathetic speech and my superior experience with student government and his sister's presence in the race, he was probably going to win. Not because he deserved it, but simply because he was Paul Warren. Can you imagine if I'd lined the hallways with pictures of my face? People would have laughed me out of the school. What a bitch, they'd say. Who does she think she is? The line between what is morally correct on an individual level and what is ethical or unethical is, as Britannica explains it, as substantial as a line drawn in the sand. In the first chapter of Election, Mr. M asks if one can be a sex pest and a leader of a country. Can someone who has been accused of sexual harassment be allowed on the Supreme Court? I would argue, no. I don't think a sex pest like Bill Clinton should have been president while lifted up as a feminist president. I don't think feminists should have defended him. I think Bill Clinton is gross, and feminists should not have defended him, and they should really be ashamed of themselves for doing that. But the question of whether men should be punished for cheating and having an affair with a 19-year-old, i.e. not necessarily assaulting someone, is something that comes up a lot in these stories. Once again, we have no issue publicly shaming women who have cheated on their partners. In 2018, during the height of Me Too, actor Matt Damon controversially commented that we're going to have to figure, there's a difference between, patting someone on the butt and rape or child molestation, right? Earlier I talked about how in the book Election, Jim and his class are debating about the story of the intellectually disabled girl being sexually assaulted. Despite his obvious misogyny and his victim blaming towards Tracy, Mr. M can see as clear as day that those men deserve to be held accountable for what they did to her. It's not so clear when it comes to his friend Dave though. It's easy for him to see the disabled girl as a victim. She's disabled, and we as a society already have a condescending view of mentally disabled people where we infantilize them and view them as children in adult bodies. That's not to say this girl wasn't a victim. She was. But why can't that same attitude exist for people like Tracy? Just because Dave didn't force her doesn't make her less of a victim. Our jumbled sense of morality and what we individually think is good or bad influences how we discern certain victims and decide who we feel is worthy of true victimhood. Another reason people were so wrong about Tracy was because Tracy wasn't a likable victim. And we all know that likability trumps everything. But what we deem likable or unlikable in certain kinds of people, especially public figures, is not very consistent, nor is it always logical. So what does any of this have to do with male feminists? Well,
a woman saying yes to a date with a man is literally insane and ill-advised. And the whole species' existence counts on them doing it. And I don't know how do women still go out with guys? When you consider the fact that there is no greater threat to women than men. We're the #1 threat to women. Globally and historically, we're the #1 cause of injury and mayhem to women. We're the worst thing that ever happens to them. That's true. You know what our #1 threat is? Heart disease. That's the whole thing. That's it. Just our own heart going, dude, you can't keep doing this.
In the late summer of 2013, author and critic Mickey Kendall had a bone to pick with white feminists and created the now famous Twitter hashtag, Solidarity is for white women. Detailing this ordeal in an article for The Guardian, she says, hashtag Solidarity is for white women started in a moment of frustration. one of my good friends, Sadat Harry, had been a target of Hugo Schweizer in the days before everyone was forced to face the truth about him. In the course of a very public Twitter meltdown, he admitted specifically targeting women of color because they were in his way. Hugo Schweizer, a writer and former instructor at Pasadena City College, had gone on a manic Twitter rant wherein he confessed to being a fraud and not being qualified to teach women's studies. He apologized to Jessica Cohen, former editor-in-chief of Jezebel, and Jill Filipovic, editor for the now defunct feminist blog site Feminists, for making them feel like they couldn't publicly denounce him. In the Guardian article, Mickey expresses her frustrations with both editors along with the other white feminists who were responsible for platforming Hugo in their publications. During his Twitter rant, which by the way included about 140 tweets that have since been deleted, he spoke openly about his struggles with mental health. Hugo was bipolar and credited his mania for how he was able to, as he says, talk a good game. In one of the tweets, he admits how fucking awesome it was to get the attention he was getting, and that he relished it. Many people disavowed him, but some sympathized with his struggle. To Mickey, this felt especially insulting, considering Hugo had just admitted to attacking black feminist bloggers who had their own blog sites that held space for women of color. In one tweet he wrote, "In women of color, you were right. I was awful to you because you were in the way." He later criticized the hashtag, saying, "This whole hashtag solidarity is for white women thing is an abusive cudgel to be used against a lot of people who are really working at inclusivity." Note that he feels righteous in saying the hashtag is abusive, even though he just admitted to attacking women of color. Articles around this time that reported on the incident rarely if ever bring up these two tweets. They mentioned that women of color had criticized white feminists online, but Hugo's misogynoir was hardly ever touched upon or delved into. If you disregard the Guardian article, many would probably never know he said that. Hugo had no problem not only admitting to being kind of full of shit, but also professing guilt for deceiving the people who enjoyed his work, and thought of him as a necessary and important voice in feminist discourse. Earlier that year, he wrote a piece for Jezebel titled, "Age is Never Just a Number: How Girls Got Older Men, Younger Women Ranked." The piece is about an episode of Lena Dunham's Girls, where Lena's character Hannah, who was 24 during this season, meets Patrick Wilson, who is said to be 42, and the two have a short fling. Hugo tells the reader how older men are conditioned to find younger women more appealing, and for a lot of older men, a young woman being interested in them strokes their ego. He says, quote, "As she so often does, Hannah reverses the stereotype by being the sexual aggressor, and Joshua's intensely grateful reaction suggests not just surprise at her boldness, but also perhaps a kind of relief that a woman in her mid-20s finds him still desirable. Forget the dick ringing from male writers about how a hottie like Wilson would never go for a young woman who looks like Dunham. Not only does that woefully underrate the sex appeal of the girl's star, it also obscures the reality that having a younger woman walk into your house and make the first move is a classic middle-aged man's fantasy. Joshua's eager, bewildered gratitude is only a surprise to those hung up on the furious hotness differential between Dunham and Wilson. For anyone familiar with the older man, younger woman dynamic, his hungry response is instantly recognizable. Recognizable to whom, I wonder? To be fair, I appreciate that Hugo doesn't make a big deal about the attractiveness gap that people to this day are weirdly obsessed with. Only Hugo isn't exactly above any of this. He may condemn age gap relationships in his writing, something he says still mostly involves older men and younger women and not always the other way around. He was currently, at the time of writing this piece, having multiple affairs with his female students who were typically between the ages of 18 and 27. Hugo at the time was in his mid-40s, married, and had a child. During this Twitter rant, Hugo said feminists were now allowed to denounce him, and that he was out of feminism because he was, quote, such a piss-poor example of it. When I launched the hashtag solidarity is for white women, I thought it would largely be a discussion between people impacted by the latest bout of problematic behavior from mainstream white feminists. It was intended to be Twitter's shorthand for how often feminists of color are told that the racism they experience isn't a feminist issue. First few tweets reflect the deeply personal impact of such a long-running structural issue. This bizarre and complicated story exemplifies many things, one of which is the silencing of people of color's concerns. If there is, say, a celebrity who has a history of making racist comments or being hostile to people of color, the mainstream generally doesn't care until said celebrity or public figure has done something that affects white people, or sometimes more specifically, white women. See, it wasn't just the hashtag that ended Hugo's male feminist reign. After being featured on the Feminist blog site, fans of the site found old blog posts from Hugo. In it, they discovered that Hugo had confessed to an attempted murder-suicide of his ex-girlfriend and got off scot-free. When this discovery was brought to light, many of his longtime fans who already knew of this horrific story kind of brushed it off. But people who weren't and thought of Hugo as an incredible male feminist writer and voice were appalled, and when he spoke of it again apologetically during during one of his Twitter rants. It only fueled the fire. Now, admittedly, that is a much grander issue than just being a racist, mediocre writer. But this incident happened in 1998, and it wasn't publicly unearthed until 2013. Former Jezebel editor Jessica Cohen continued to feature him in Jezebel and stood by that decision. But Jill Filipovic of Feminists expressed that she felt betrayed by Hugo and acknowledged that his actions were extremely abusive. Still, she believes that people can change. I think the question is, does someone who has done something that abusive to a woman need to be a spokesperson for feminism? I think the answer is no. Still, many of Hugo's fans stood by him, citing his honesty and his mental health struggles as what kept them from fully condemning what he'd done. Now his cultural presence is practically non-existent. He continues to write now for his own Substack, and according to him has been trying to stay off of social media. In a 2014 article by Mona Gable, where she detailed the rise and fall of Hugo Schweizer, and even interviewed him for the piece, you get some backstory on Hugo's life, and what led to him becoming what Rebecca Holman has dubbed America's most infamous male feminist. Like another well-known, presently disgraced male feminist, Joss Whedon, Hugo, a ripe Gen Xer who was born in the spring of 1967, grew up with a feminist mother and younger brother. In 2005, while married to his fourth wife, he blogged about how having a feminist mom gave him a less conventional perception of housework, and says he always did his fair share. Schweizer loved telling the story of seeing Miss Magazine on the coffee table as a boy. He also loved recounting how his mother had influenced his desire to teach feminism. After his first marriage ended in 1993, he got married again in 1995 and began teaching women's studies at Pasadena City College. I was able to sell the interview committee with enthusiasm over experience, he told me. Indeed, what Schweizer lacked in credentials, he made up for in energy and chutzpah. His class, Women in American Society, was hugely popular. He covered the usual stuff: the suffragette movement in the 1860s, women winning the right to vote in 1920, the inspiration of Rosie the Riveter during World War II. It was his performance that set him apart. As Schweizer paraded around the room, hopped up on caffeine, his lectures were mesmerizing. He was a very compelling speaker, recalled a former female student who considered Schweizer her mentor. It wasn't that Hugo had no credentials. He had a PhD in medieval history. Regardless, he was able to sell it, and his students loved him, especially those of the female kind. Hugo tells LA Mac that he had his female students keep journals and encouraged them to write about very personal subjects like sexuality and their family problems. This was not to push his students to let out their emotions in a healthy way or to unpack certain experiences they've had. It was to weed out the women who weren't down to fuck and hone in on the ones who were. In this article, he says he was having sex with 4 of his students, 3 of them simultaneously. It was also during this time that Hugo was struggling heavily with a cocaine and pill addiction. It led to him being hospitalized and sent to rehab. This did thankfully lead to him getting sober and getting his life together. He continued working at PCC and even disclosed his affairs with his past students, and apparently wrote a policy addressing faculty-student relationships, as the college previously had no policy regarding that. From the start of his career, Hugo charmed his way into fields where he wasn't officially qualified, took advantage of a power dynamic, and was still allowed to not only continue teaching at this college, but was given the authority to write a policy on this issue. He benefited from white male privilege in a way that I don't think Hugo has ever fully unpacked. After getting sober, he began writing personal blogs where he openly discussed his past trysts with students and his struggles with substance abuse. He didn't write them as a way to brag, but as a way to endear himself to his audience by being incredibly forthcoming and relatable, and for detailing his redemption arc. In 2006, he blogged about his favorite topic: older men's interests in younger women. See, Hugo was able to seem like an intelligent authority on the topic because people thought these affairs were a thing of the past, something that ended the minute he got sober. But this was not true, as I said earlier. After Hugo's meltdown in 2013, an anonymous Tumblr user who was one of Hugo's former students wrote that Hugo needed to tell the truth about his relationships with his female students. They didn't like that Hugo continued to imply that he hadn't done such a thing since 1998, when, as according to them, he was having a sexual relationship with them for several months, including one other girl they knew of. The author Mona Gable also says that Hugo lied to her multiple times about when he'd last slept with one of them. This was Schweizer's pattern: tell just enough of the truth to seem forthcoming and trustworthy, and then if caught lying, be polite and profess remorse. I recognize the type. The bad boy who wants to be good. The deceitful boyfriend who always has an excuse that somehow makes you unable to kick him out of your bed. When Hugo's student affairs became well known to new readers, they began to look at Hugo a little differently. And this is when the blog about the attempted murder-suicide was brought back to light. In the long and detailed post, he described the decision as an effort to end her pain. Somehow sheriff's deputies arrived. dragged them out, and brought them to Northridge Hospital, where he confessed to a psychiatrist and was interviewed by deputies. But he was never arrested, he said, because the young woman's parents didn't want to press charges. The facts of the incident were undeniably horrifying, but many readers were as upset by the way Schweizer told the story. While he didn't use his former girlfriend's name, he included salacious details about the young woman's drug use, her fragile appearance, her sex life. Hugo did express that he felt terrible about what he'd done and that he wasn't the same person. And while I do believe people can be redeemed, and I don't necessarily think someone's worst act should define them forever, this man got away with an attempted murder-suicide that was essentially dismissed because the girl's family didn't want to press charges against him for whatever reason. He got away with almost taking the life of someone else and wrote that he felt he was doing this altruistically at the time. It's easy to dismiss certain things about Hugo by referring to his ability to be honest about his flaws and how he was remorseful. But there's still a bit of sleaziness in everything he does, even when he thinks he's being honest about his sleaziness. To expound upon that, let's go back to the Twitter rant of the summer of 2013. Before and after these Twitter rants, Hugo had been repeatedly hospitalized, and on August 15th, he attempted to unalive himself and later went to stay in a sober living facility. In September of that same year, he for some reason tweeted the last name of the woman he almost killed, which of course erupted another wave of backlash. And if that isn't bad enough, he began dating a 22-year-old girl he met in a psych ward. Nurses at this psych ward told Hugo to stay away from her as she struggled with severe depression and an ED. Mona Gable interviewed Amber for this article, and during the interview, we learned that Hugo encouraged Amber to burn herself with a cigarette, something he did to curb his suicidal ideation. "I wish I hadn't done it," she said. The day before, she and Schweizer had burned themselves with cigarettes while sitting in her black pickup truck. She'd never done that before, but Schweizer, who says he burns himself to relieve his suicidal urges, showed her how. Okay, so obviously that is fucked up. As someone who has her own struggles with mental health, I can't say I haven't done very unhealthy things as a way to deal with certain thoughts that can sometimes be very overwhelming and distressing. But him enticing a young girl to engage in those behaviors is disgusting, and it reveals something about Hugo that at the time he didn't want to admit about himself. Yes, maybe older men are flattered by the attention of a young woman, but I don't think that's the only reason. It seems part of it is that these young women are not only extremely young, but also impressionable and troubled. In regard to his student affairs, it's for one really icky that he made his students journal about extremely personal shit, only as a way to see which students would be willing to hook up with him. Two, it is utterly unethical as he is a professor, and I just don't think it's appropriate to mess around with someone you have immense power over. Hugo knew these women admired him, thought he was attractive and charming. He used that to his advantage. Not only that, but he, as the professor, had access to their deepest and most vulnerable thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Some of these women viewed him as a mentor. It's comforting to rest on the fact that the appeal is just due to the desire to be flattered and to feel like you still got it. It's hard to admit that you might also just get off on being the dominant person in a power dynamic, or that you find younger women who are sometimes less experienced, and in the case of Amber, mentally unwell, more appealing because you see it as an easy way to exert control in some way. Hugo has, on some level, defended these affairs, saying that he didn't force these women into anything, that it was technically not against college policy, which was true, but just because something isn't technically against the rules doesn't make it less predatory. To give him a little credit, Hugo does seem, and emphasis on seem, but he does seem to understand this now. In 2021, when all the Britney Spears stuff was happening, he wrote a Substack piece about her and the way society often assumes young people have more power than they actually do. He opens up about sleeping with multiple men in their 40s and 50s for money when he was just a teenager. Hugo says the only thing that he benefited from was the attention he says he desperately craved. Being wanted made me feel powerful in a way that I had never felt before. There is no drug I've ever taken, no experience I've ever had that comes close to the high of seeing desire in someone else's eyes. It never lost its allure, even after I left sex work behind when my brain began to burn too hot. In my 40s, I started having affairs with my students again after years of being good. The young women were all legal adults, but in some instances barely so, because at that time I never even allowed myself to think of my past doing sex work. I didn't realize that I was partly reenacting my late adolescence, with the positions reversed. I never paid a student with money or grades, as that would have ruined the fantasy that they craved me for me. I was meticulous about securing enthusiastic consent, and I trusted that despite the age and power differential, these young women had the agency to decide what they wanted. His feeling of wanting to be wanted is connected to his previous passion for being a well-known male feminist. In a fairly innocuous way, he wanted his feminist preachings to appeal to men, and he wanted men to have a space within feminist discourse, which is a worthy goal. In a less innocuous way, he simply enjoyed the attention women gave to him because of his feminism. Was your work designed to please a certain school of feminism but never a realistic model for men? Well, yes. I think primarily I wrote for women. I designed my writing primarily for women. One of the things that I figured out is the best way to get attention from women was not to describe women's own experience to them because they found that patronizing and offensive. Instead, it was to appear to challenge other men, to turn other men into the kind of boyfriend material, father material, or husband material that women so desperately wanted. Most women have a lot of disappointment in men, and I very deliberately want to go to the place where that disappointment lives and present to them a counter-narrative of something possible. I mean, I really would like to change men. It is not so much a lie that I didn't believe a word I was saying. If wishes were fishes, they would live in the sea. I really did want guys to be better. But on some level, you were telling an audience what they wanted to hear, knowing that women were reading it and not men. Exactly. I always wrote for women, but wrote in a really backhanded way where it appeared I was writing for men so that it would not appear too presumptuous, and instead it would make me look better. And that required presenting myself as the ideal husband, father, and reformed bad boy. My point is that I was writing for women because I wanted validation from women. The way to get validation from women was to present an idealized picture of what is possible for men. Idealized is a key word to keep in mind here. In an old video I made about High School Musical in Greece, there's a section where I talk about this normalized idea of men that always grinds my gears. I credit Sarah Marshall for being the first person I heard talk about this, but it's really frustrating how women and feminists are often ridiculed and shamed for making man-hating comments or for what appear to men as man-hating comments, as if we don't live in a society that is both constantly praising men as superior and also perpetuating the message at every turn that men are terrible and you should be afraid of them at all times. When a woman is raped by someone she knows, she is told that she should have known better than to do X, Y, or Z, because men are predators, murderers, and rapists, even if he seems nice. You shouldn't be surprised if he decides to force himself on you. He's a man, after all. We live in a culture that doesn't think very highly of men, but if a woman dares say men are trash, she will be obliterated. Not all men, they say, after defending a rapist with the old boys will be boys. If not all men, then why continue to use that as a defense? I was always taught to see men as a potential threat, and that it was my responsibility to not leave my drink unattended, or to not walk home alone at night, or just don't let a man rape you. Men are gross and horny and aggressive, and you should expect nothing less. It is no surprise then that there are men out there who also recognize this and understand that while man-hating is not productive, it stems from a place of hurt and resentment women have towards men, and they want to be the difference. While not entirely, this urge has some pick-me elements to it. As Rebecca Holman puts it in her article for The Telegraph about Hugo Schweizer, I don't believe we should rule men out of feminist discourse. But I can't help but feel that the true male feminists, the ones who are actually living it, aren't going to be the ones who feel the need to stop and tell the world what a good job they're doing. In her incredible book, The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love by the late Bell Hooks, she describes this hunger for male love that many women and even men have. No one hungers for male love more than the little girl or boy who rightfully needs and seeks love from dad. He may be absent, dead, present in body, yet emotionally not there. But the girl or boy hungers to be acknowledged, recognized, respected, cared for. All around our nation, a billboard carries this message. Each night, millions of kids go to sleep starving for attention from their dads. Because patriarchal culture has already taught girls and boys that dad's love is more valuable than mother love, it is unlikely that maternal affection will heal the lack of fatherly love. No wonder then that these girls and boys grow up angry with men. Angry that they have been denied the love they need to feel whole, worthy, accepted. Heterosexual girls and homosexual boys can and do become the women and men who make romantic bonds the place where they quest to find and know male love. But that quest is rarely satisfied. Usually rage, grief, and unrelenting disappointment lead women and men to close off the part of themselves that was hoping to be touched and healed by male love. They learn then to settle for whatever positive attention men are able to give. They learn to overvalue it. They learn to pretend that it is love. They learn how not to speak the truth about men and love. They learn to live the lie.
Don't get me started on men.
Don't get me started on men.
Don't get me started on men.
If you go on Google and search up how women who are feminists feel about self-proclaimed male feminists, you'll come across a slew of articles and forum posts from women basically warning you to stay away from any man who identifies as a male feminist. In a 2-year-old Reddit post from the 2X chromosomes subreddit, a user tells us to beware of men like this, and they list the qualities typically found in these kinds of men. 1. He expects an award for being a decent person. 2. He acts like he knows what women need, and better than the women themselves. 3. He puts other men down because they claim to be the only one that could love you for who you are, and all other men are misogynistic. He, on the other hand, is your savior. 4. He amplifies the rumor that only alpha males can be sexist. 5. Has ever muttered the phrase, "Real women have blank." 6. His feminism is not intersectional. A lot of the things listed here describe Hugo. He doesn't understand intersectionality. He reaped the rewards of being a beloved male feminist. He also kind of wanted to be a savior, or at least a beacon of light for women who he says are disappointed in men. In a 2015 article from The Guardian by Kate Island, she details why she won't date another male feminist. One story she shares is about a man who asked her non-stop questions about her lady opinions on certain topics. And when she asked him to chill out, he responded by saying she should be grateful that a man would want to hear her opinion, period. Going back to the bell hooks quote about how we are conditioned to overvalue any kind of attention or affection from men, men like this, like Hugo, know that there are a lot of women who generalize about men and think they all suck, and so he feels that any good thing he does that is seemingly uncharacteristic of a straight man should be met with adulation. I'm not like the other guys, I'm different. Therefore, you should be obsessed with me.
Yeah, like a date.
No thank you.
Okay, bitch!
What?
I'm wearing that shirt and you won't even let me nut!
It's in a way just an extension of the nice guy. The guy who thinks because he is nice that he is owed something in return for being nice, unlike other men. And then women who aren't interested in them are shamed for never going for the nice guy while constantly complaining about men.
I always complain that guys aren't nice, but then if they find a nice guy, they're not always interested.
What bothers me most about these things is that, for one, anyone can call themselves a feminist, and that can mean a myriad of things. I'm someone who has been obsessed with feminism since I was at least a preteen. Something I've picked up on more and more is how much even men on the left can still be very ignorant about feminism. Sometimes their feminism simply ends with supporting reproductive rights, and what is perceived as feminism is really just benevolent sexism. There are people who think feminism is just putting women on a pedestal and listing off every reason why women are amazing and putting women into a box. 2, something I don't think people realize is that anyone can be nice. Niceness is not the same as kindness, in my opinion. Anyone can perform being nice and friendly, especially in situations like work where you might have to be nice as a part of your job. A truly kind person doesn't view their good deeds as debts to keep in their column. If you are kind and you do good things out of the goodness of your heart, not because you expect something in return necessarily. That's not to say that you shouldn't expect respect and kindness from people in your life who you are kind to. I'm not saying you shouldn't be angry if someone is mistreating you, of course, but if you are kind, it's because you want to be, I assume. You want to have a pleasant interaction with this person, and you don't want to hurt them or make them feel uncomfortable. But if you're expecting a kiss or sex as a result, that is not being kind, that's being manipulative. Like, do y'all remember that episode of Barry where Barry and Sally slept together, but Sally made it clear that she was not interested in dating him and was a little mean to him, and so he later buys her an Apple computer and acts hurt when she understandably feels uncomfortable about it?
Yours was cracked, so I bought you a new one.
That's like 3 months of my rent.
I remember watching this with someone a while back, and they felt Sally was being mean. And that if someone gifted her an Apple computer, she'd be so grateful. And it's like, girl, just because someone spends a lot of money on you doesn't mean you have to be grateful, nor does it mean you have to accept the gift. People do buy expensive gifts as a form of manipulation. People use their money all the time to make themselves seem better than they actually are. But for some reason, we still have a hard time understanding that. We think if someone does something that appears to be objectively nice, that must be a good person. And those people end up thinking of themselves as good people and put themselves on pedestals. And those are the worst kinds of people.
Say it, or I'll kill your husband. I'll do it, I'll gut him like a fish. You're a good person.
Oh, thank you.
Towards me. If you want to prove that you are a feminist man, just be yourself. And if yourself ends up exhibiting some misogynistic behavior, maybe you don't understand feminism as much as you thought. And that's okay. There are things I still need to learn. We are all a work in progress, but that's the thing with some of these men, and even a lot of women, frankly, as I discussed in my white feminism video. A lot of people think they understand feminism because of how mainstream it was during the 2010s. The femvertisements and the branding of feminist slogans and messages tricked people into thinking that they understood feminism and misogyny and patriarchy. But most people still don't get it. It's one thing to know and have a general understanding of the terms, but do you understand it inside and out? Do you understand that it is not just a cis white man with a lot of power? Because if we understood how it worked, these men could unpack their own misogyny and be better feminists, and women could unpack their internalized misogyny, and white women could unpack their racism and stop disappointing us. We would also stop glorifying male feminists. At least then men wouldn't feel incentivized to pander for pussy. It's not wrong to admire a male feminist or to even be excited about a man entering a feminist space and offering a male point of view that doesn't denigrate women or perpetuate harmful ideas. It's wrong to treat these people because they have progressive opinions and may represent a deviation from the norm as superhuman or godly. I say the same thing for Lizzo. We should never be surprised at seeing these people fall from grace, because glorifying people and placing so much on their shoulders is bound to reveal some cracks under the surface.
And of course, Buffy's response. More intimate still. This show is designed to be a feminist show. Not a polemic, but a very straight-on feminist show. And for her to be so abused by him, and for her response to be to kick him in what Spike would refer to as the ghoulies, it's very primal. It's very important. It's kind of empowering, and I kind of love it.
So in my Delana video, I gave some backstory on my history with the Vampire Diaries. It was a show that I was obsessed with growing up, and I'm not even big into vampires. The teen vamp trend of that time took over all of us. Except I didn't go the Twilight route. I was in my not like other girls phase, and so I felt I was too good for it, and that TVD was better. Then Delana happened, and I was like, fuck this show, I'm going to Buffy, and that's literally why I got into it. So thanks Delana, I guess. No one I knew had watched it, and I didn't remember it being on TV growing up. I was also a huge fan of SMG because of Scooby-Doo, of course, and Cruel Intentions. Buffy is a very weird and campy show. The vibe was completely different from TVD, especially with the dialogue, and I was instantly hooked. When I learned that the show's creator was a feminist, it made me love it even more because Buffy Summers is one of the best female characters of all time.
She's a three-dimensional human being, and I think she's not a stereotypical comic book character. She's not your typical heroine.
If you've been on the feminist side of the internet, you've probably heard women complain and make jokes about the weird ways men write women, especially in books. There's a whole subreddit dedicated to it. Usually it's mocking how male authors will over-sexualize every single thing a female character does, writes her very stereotypically, and shows that he clearly has never really talked to a lot of different women, or is just misogynistic. One of my favorite hateable men writing women tropes is the slutty girl with daddy issues who's really hot, but doesn't know she's hot, and that's what makes her hot. Such a common trope that I don't hear people talk about a lot, but a lot of men have a fetish for broken hot women with daddy issues. It's a little weird. Or the way some of them think the only rivalry that can exist is one of them having blonde hair and the other one having brown hair. This isn't just misogyny either. This can also be related to fat phobia or racism. The way thin people write fat characters, or the way white people write characters of color. People write what they know or what they think they know, and sometimes it can come off as very insulting and one-dimensional. Buffy Summers is anything but that. Joss Whedon created the character of Buffy as a subversion. He thought, what if the hot cheerleader in the horror movie who gets killed right away fought back? What if she had the strength to take on a gang of men or even vampires? This idea was partly influenced by the girl power movement of that era. The movement meant to empower girls by highlighting and celebrating traits commonly associated with girls and portraying women and girls as powerful. Another popular show inspired by this movement was the classic animated show, the Powerpuff Girls. The idea and draw of the Powerpuff Girls is that they are adorable and small, but they can also kill you and shoot lasers out of their eyes. They are made with sugar, spice, and everything nice. But due to the professor's clumsiness, they were more than just girls. They were girls who could beat your ass. This movie was kind of the femvertisements of the 2010s. It was promoting feminist ideas or feminist-ish ideas to a mainstream culture and packaging it in a way that was digestible. Buffy was a huge part of that. But unlike a lot of girl power inspired female characters, Buffy is one of the few that still holds up in a lot of ways. Sure, we can debate over what the show is saying about women's strength or this concept of a woman having to possess some special power in order to be strong and be able to fight back, unlike Xander, who has no special power but is always bravely fighting monsters and demons because he's a Joss Whedon insert. But if you ignore that and you watch the show from the beginning to end, even if season 7 fucking sucks, you see a character who has more layers than any female character from 90210 combined. Commonly at the time, men who wrote strong women wrote them as desexualized, tough, heartless badasses who had 7 brothers, and that's why they know how to fight.
Lucy, where'd you learn to fight like that?
I grew up with 5 older brothers. It was either learn how to fight or get held down and burped on.
It's this idea of women inhabiting toxic masculinity and that being presented as girl power feminism. It's inherently anti-feminist and anti-feminine because it implies that the only way for a woman to be able to defend herself and kick men's asses is if she contains attributes commonly associated with men and masculinity. Buffy contains some of those qualities, and there's a lot to be critiqued in how she's written, but she was still hyper-feminine and girly. She wanted to find love. She was funny, smart, vulnerable, loving, and kind. Similar to Spider-Man, when Buffy was chosen as the Slayer, there didn't seem to be much doubt about whether or not Buffy would take on this dangerous responsibility. She was aware of her strength and power and felt it was her duty to protect people even if it meant she would get nothing in return. She wasn't doing this for rewards. She was doing this out of the goodness of her heart. The fact that in reality she maintains who she is at her core and how that doesn't interfere with the ability to have compassion for others or to have hope is really incredible. And to top it off, Sarah Michelle Gellar was clearly built in a lab to play Buffy, and as much as Joss deserves credit for writing such a complex female character, Sarah deserves an equal amount of praise, if not more, for making Buffy so iconic and memorable. What made Joss Whedon so iconic and memorable to fans was his fixation on centering women's stories, advocating for Hollywood to create more stories about women, supporting feminist causes, and publicly and proudly identifying as a feminist, which was a big deal in the 1990s. As with Hugo, he grew up with a feminist mom and often cited her feminism as what inspired him to write female characters that didn't fall into stereotypes. Anytime Joss talks about Buffy, you can be sure that he will 1. Talk about how Buffy was created due to a desire to subvert what he had traditionally seen among female characters who look like Buffy, and 2. He will describe one of the major themes of Buffy being about the horrors of high school.
And we deal with the high school issues as well, which is pretty more horrific than vampires trying to suck the blood out of you.
Everybody I've said, I'm making a horror show about high school, they're like, that's redundant. I mean, high school is when your life is most like a horror movie.
Activities include slaying vampires.
Buffy was designed, as kind of a feminist icon and kind of just a fun twist on movies.
To play a heroine that sort of transcended all those categories. That wasn't the ditz or the most popular or the prettiest.
All right, here we go, kids.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer is such a huge hit because Joss Whedon brought back that kick-ass babe.
The girl you think is the victim not being the victim anymore.
In the universe of Buffy, the fictional town of Sunnydale, California sits atop a literal hellmouth. And throughout the show, especially in season 1, we watch Buffy and the Scooby Gang as they start referring to themselves as fighting off mysterious new demons and dealing with supernatural occurrences that disrupt their daily school lives. Like with Vampire Diaries, the show knew exactly how to mix the supernatural with the normal day-to-day human problems that befall teenagers, from sex to bullying to unrequited love. Buffy was a passion project for Joss, who saw himself in Buffy and in the problems the characters he crafted faced. You don't need to watch too many interviews to catch on to the fact that Joss had a tough time growing up. In one interview, he describes the show as a way for viewers to let out their teen angst and feel catharsis when watching the underdogs overpower their bullies.
It is an opportunity for everybody to, to get out their angst, to deal with the bully who beat them up, and all those things that happened in high school.
This, along with Joss's wit, self-deprecating humor, soft voice, and nerdiness, is what endeared him to fans, and as the show gained in popularity, coupled with the success of the spin-off Angel, Joss was propelled into a godlike status. Even knowing what I know now, I couldn't help but find him likable in a lot of these interviews or when listening to directors' commentaries on episodes of Buffy. When you admire someone for creating something that really speaks to you and that person seems cool or is funny or their opinions on certain subjects are inspiring and informative, you might exalt that person, place them on a pedestal. Joss was more than happy to stand on that pedestal and look down at all the people who worshipped him, and instead of using that godly pedestal for good, he used it to his own selfish advantage. A story we've seen play out time and time again. Something many people don't like to consider is the way people who are widely beloved, like a Bill Cosby, can sometimes use that beloved status as a tool to abuse and harass and or assault people. After Cosby's conviction was overturned, mostly black men and older black women rejoiced. Their God, who they felt had been brought down by a bunch of lying white women, had been set free, and they could now feel vindicated in their blind defense of him. Cosby and Whedon share a lot of similarities in that they both used their brand as a way to show the true, sinister nature of who they really were. In fact, all the male feminists we're discussing in this video have this in common. Something people have said about both Joss and Bill is that they both led double lives and that they both had everyone fooled. Buffy was so beloved, in fact, that she earned Whedon a similarly privileged place in fans' hearts and a broader reputation as a man who championed empowered women characters. In the desert of late 90s and early 2000s popular culture, Whedon was heralded as that rarest of birds, the feminist Hollywood man. For many, he was an example of what more equitable storytelling might look like, a model for how to create compelling women protagonists who were also very, very fun to watch. Buffy was refreshing at the time, and it was refreshing to see that a straight white man, was behind it. But that man wasn't just this lovable nerd who loved women. He was a very troubled man who has openly recounted his history of bullying and abuse at the hands of his own brothers. Even his mother, who he previously praised for her strong feminist ideals, admitted that it's hard being raised by someone like that. Someone who he calls remarkable and inspiring. But growing up with a remarkable and inspiring woman as a mother wasn't enough to prevent Joss from playing out the classic story of the bullied kid who later becomes a bully himself. In a 2022 article for Vulture by Lila Shapiro titled The Undoing of Joss Whedon, she interviewed some of the writers who worked on Buffy, along with Whedon himself. One of the writers recalled an incident where Joss ridiculed another writer because he didn't like what she'd written. It was basically 90 minutes of vicious mockery, the writer said. Joss pretended to have a slide projector and he read her dialogue out loud and pretended he was giving a lecture on terrible writing as he went through the slides and made funny voices. Funny for him. The guys were looking down at their pages and this woman was fighting tears the entire time. I've had my share of shitty showrunners, but the intent to hurt, that's the thing that stands out for me now. Something that I hinted at in the intro with Tracy Flick and Mr. McAllister is the way people can minimize certain acts of harm because they don't involve, say, force or violence. Like how Ellen thinks it's funny she got canceled for being mean and not being, a fucking asshole who used her power and influence to wield power over those under her. She thinks because she didn't, assault anyone, that somehow means it's silly for people to have turned on her. We've all had shitty bosses who may have belittled us or created toxic work environments. And a lot of people think that those are the dues you have to pay until you get into a position of power. Why would you complain about something that you might want someday?
I do believe in enormous respect for the process, for the people above you. I've always treated television and movies like the army. Where you take orders absolutely from the person above you because one day you'll be giving them and you'll expect the same.
We really need to talk about respect. In my mom video, I talked about how parents expect their children to respect them due to the very fact that they birth them and take care of them and pay their bills, even if they aren't giving them respect. They want you to respect them by default. They do not see it as something you need to earn and something you must give if you want someone to return that sentiment. That's how people in power think. Both Ellen and Joss read to me as two people who got drunk off their own power and popularity. I mean, that story of that waitress who Ellen got fired because of her nail or something.
A week later, Farrah says her boss got an email from the talk show queen.
They were like, we have to talk to you. She emailed the owner of the restaurant and complained about your chip nail polish.
What?
And I was like, what?
Farrah says in a bid to placate the high-profile celebrity, her boss hit her with a 2-week suspension at no pay.
I don't want to name any names. I don't want to name any names. But to really think about it, I mean, she's so busy and so rich from her, why do you even have time time to write that email?
Like, why would you be so enraged over chipped nail polish and then wait 2 weeks to sit down and write an email to her boss and essentially get her fired? Yes, she quit, but of course she quit. 2 weeks without pay? Are you fucking kidding me? Shit, cops get paid leave when they murder black people. Why not give her suspension with pay since, all she did was her fucking job and she didn't kill anybody? It's that attitude that enables these people to just be awful to other human beings in ways that aren't exactly criminal, but really alert you to the fact that this person is not a nice or kind person. They aren't someone who has consideration for others. In fact, they're a really nasty person who is vindictive and resentful. You see that in how Ellen has reflected on that recently. She is doing the classic thing that bullies always do. They bully people and then minimize the harm they've caused and try to paint the people they bullied or harassed or were just shitty to as sensitive, whiny babies who are just overreacting. There's another story a production member shares in the article about how once Joss Whedon and an actress who was on the show he was messing around with came into her office while she was working, started making out on the floor, and were banging into her chair. They were banging into my chair, she said. How can you concentrate? It was gross. This happened more than once, she said. These actions proved he had no respect for me and my work. She quit the show even though she had no other job lined up. Joss Whedon was not just dating actresses who worked on the show, but also colleagues and fans, while still married to his now ex-wife, Kai Cole. Kai Cole had already outed Joss Whedon as full of shit long before the Ray Fisher scandal was even known to us. Despite understanding on some level that what he was doing was wrong, he never conceded the hypocrisy of being out in the world preaching feminist ideals while at the same time taking away my right to make choices for my life and my body based on the truth. He deceived me for 15 years so he could have everything he wanted. I believed, everyone believed, that he was one of the good guys, committed to fighting for women's rights, committed to our marriage and to the women he worked with. But I now see how he used his relationship with me as a shield, both during and after our marriage, so no one would question his relationships with other women or scrutinize his writing as anything other than feminist. I thought we were a couple, a team. I was a powerful influence on the career choices Joss made during the 20 years we were together. I kept him grounded and helped him find the quickest way to the success he so deeply craved. I loved him, and in return he lied to me. A lot. He said after he left he understood. It's not just like I killed you, but I thought I'd done it subtly over years, that I'd been poisoning you, chipping away at you. He made me doubt my own instincts and watched me move further away from my personal values and social mores. Trying to connect with him, never telling me it was impossible. By the time he finally confessed the truth, 15 years after his first affair on the set of Buffy, I was broken. My brain could not fit my experience of our life together through the new lens of his deceit. The part where she goes into how she realized the way he used their marriage as a cover is significant. It's sadly not an uncommon story. A woman building up a man only for that man to eventually cheat on her with a younger, hotter woman or leave them for a younger, hot woman once they become rich and successful. And this is why we do not build men, ladies. Don't do it. Let that man build himself. See, Joss was smart. Somewhat. He knew that if he was a bachelor out here fucking a bunch of hot young women who he worked with, people would have immediately saw through his feminist facade. He needed his wife Kai to make him look like a wife guy. Like with our boy Hugo. Some of the younger women he was dating recall finding out that he was dating someone else as he was dating them. One of them, who Joss hired to watch him write, says they secretly dated off and on until he suddenly sent her an email saying she could no longer be his girlfriend. Oh, I should add that this happened very soon after they had sex for the first time.
I created Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a movie a long time ago to protect, as I've said before, the blonde girl in the alley who always got killed. One of the distinguishing features of the blonde girl in the alley who always got killed was that she actually had sex. She always seemed to be punished for it. That bothered me, and I thought it wasn't fair. So Buffy was created as a sort of stereotype buster on that level. However, when we came back to do the series, we knew we had to keep her in high school for a while. We had to bounce her age back to 15, make her a sophomore instead of a senior. So the issue of sex was one that we were going to have to deal with eventually in a different and somewhat more serious way on the series. Innocence represents the effort to do that. What we basically wanted to show was a horror movie version of the idea of I sleep with my boyfriend and now he doesn't call me, and also he's killing hookers in alleys.
One woman, Arden Lee, who was a young sex educator, met Joss in 2012, and the two began dating. Arden had written a book called The New Rules of Attraction, and in it she details one of her worst nightmares, which was when a former boyfriend dumped her on her birthday. So in 2015, hours before her birthday, Joss came to her house and dumped her. If he was like, What could I do to Arden that would be her worst nightmare? That would have been it, she said. Joss destroyed a beautiful thing just to show who he had the power to. That's literally everything you need to know about him. And that's exactly what I mean. It's like what that writer said earlier, that intent to harm is what gets me. Joss Whedon admits in this article that he felt awful about the actresses he messed around with and even admonishes his abuse of the power dynamic. But is sure to add that he couldn't possibly have resisted the beautiful women who ignored him in high school. But in spite of the article that Kai Cole wrote about her husband's philandering in 2017, and some fans raising concerns about the way he was writing women in the MCU, Joss was still, for the most part, held in high regard by his fans. That is, until Justice League happened.
You're Jonathan Levinson. Oh my god. Oh my god. My name is Karen and I think you're wonderful. Oh my god.
Hi, Karen. Thank you. Oh, is that my book? Well, I could...
Yeah, please, I didn't want to bother you. It's Karen with a K.
Something I wasn't aware of is that Joss Whedon was actually a writer on Roseanne for a little bit during the early seasons. See, Joss is a nepotism baby, which I also didn't know before making this video. Both his father, Tom Whedon, and his grandfather, John Whedon, were both TV writers for shows like The Golden Girls and The Donna Reed Show. Joss has said that he doesn't like the format of sitcoms because of the joke after joke thing where there's no room for realness. But he still enjoyed the feminist themes of Roseanne and admired Roseanne Barr's feminism. God, I wonder what these two have in common. The reason I'm bringing up Roseanne is because there was an incident in 1989 where Roseanne received backlash from the tabloids and then took it out on her writing staff, which wasn't uncommon because it's Roseanne, who has been a problematic her entire career. Joss Whedon recalled a story from his time on Roseanne in his biography by Amy Pascal called Joss Whedon, the Biography. No, I did not read this, but there is a passage from the book that is available on Goodreads, and I'm going to read from that. As Joss showed up to start work on the new season, Barr gathered everyone on staff and made a speech about how the tabloids were obsessed with her, and had sources among the crew feeding them details of her personal life. Joss, who had heard about tabloid drama and these staff conflicts, anticipated a speech that would bring everybody closer. It's us against the world, and damn it, we've got good work to do here. Let's all get it done. Instead, Roseanne told the writers they had better keep their mouths shut, or they would all be fired. It was a plot twist that he wasn't expecting. It made me realize that every time somebody opens their mouth, they have an opportunity to do one of two things: connect or divide. Some people inherently divide, and some people inherently connect, Joss said. Connecting is the most important thing, and actually an easy thing to do. I try to make a connection with someone every time I talk to them, even if I'm firing them. People can be treated with respect. That is one of the most important things a showrunner can do, is make everybody understand that we're all involved, that we're all on the same level. Oh, really? In 2013, in an article for Entertainment Weekly, the interviewer James Hibbard asked him about this quote, and he says, "It's been as big of a game changer for me as anything, because her preamble is, they're all out to get us. She created this cocoon of safety. Then she ended with, and if any of you ever talks to the press, I'll fucking fire you." I was like, wow, that was like a twist ending. I didn't see that coming. That's when I realized that this is not the St. Crispin's Day speech. This was a threat. I was so in her corner because her life was insane and her work was groundbreaking as a feminist. A lot of us would have followed her straight into battle and taken that hill, but she turned us away. There wasn't even really a question, and then he gives this weird, vague answer, because then in another interview where he addresses this, he says that he strongly believes in respecting the ones at the top.
I do believe in enormous respect for the process, for the people above you. I've always treated television and movies like the army.
If you think everyone should be treated as though they are on the same level, that is incongruous with the idea of respecting the ones at the top. Ideally, everyone should receive the same amount of respect because they are all contributing to this project. Joss Whedon gave a speech at an Equality Now awards ceremony in 2006. In it, he jokes about constantly being questioned in press junkets on why he's always writing strong woman characters.
These stories give people strength, and I've heard it from a number of people and I've felt it myself, and it's not just women, it's men, and I think there is something particular about a female protagonist that allows a man to identify with her, that opens up something that he might, an aspect of himself he might be unable to express hopes and desires he might be uncomfortable expressing through a male identification figure. So it really crosses across both, and I think it helps people, in that way. So why do you create these strong women characters? Because they're hot.
Joss not only said that he always wanted Buffy to be an icon, but he wanted people regardless of gender to see themselves in Buffy as he did. And that seems great. And I can understand how him constantly repeating that in every interview would make him seem like a great guy.
I always intended it to have the kind of impact on popular culture that it did. I wanted Buffy to be a pop icon. I wanted her to be remembered. I wanted her to be in people's interior lives. I wanted her to be a hero to kids.
And to be clear, it's not bad for men to write strong female characters or to even talk about it. But when you read between the lines, there are signs that maybe it's not strictly the feminism or having a feminist mother that drives this motivation to center conventionally attractive women. In a 2021 Washington Post article by Robin Barr titled, "Joss Whedon's Feminist Shows All Conceal Toxic Ideas About Women," they say, quote, "Grasping the sheer authority Whedon has wielded over vulnerable young women throughout his decades in Hollywood, I cringe thinking about the creepy words on a fan t-shirt I once prized. Over the past decade, as more female, non-binary, and trans auteurs have produced personalized television series that confront how gender has impacted their lives, I've slowly realized that Whedon's visions of on-screen feminism often amounted to a reductive, masculinized conception of what it means to be a forceful woman. In other words, as I wrote in my review of Netflix's Buffy light occult drama Warrior Nun, it was a hetero male fantasy of muscular hot girl matriarchy, in which female empowerment is really a convenient supplement to male desire. Even today, the image of a slender and alluring young woman kicking butt is seen as the apotheosis of the archetypal strong female character. From the scantily clad warriors of the Zack Snyder flick Sucker Punch, to Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games series, to the super-heroic women at the Marvel and DC film franchises. It's a paradigm wherein women's strength is apparently defined by our willingness to commit violence, and Whedon played a central role in cementing its place in our culture. In Season 3 episode Helpless, Buffy is put to a Slayer test that she is unaware of. Giles, her watcher, is instructed to inject Buffy with a sedative, which takes away all of her strength. There is a scene where Buffy complains to Giles about this, gaslighting her. He says it could just be a flu bug or something. Outside during pastime, when some guy that Cordelia is talking to gets physically aggressive with her, Buffy tries to save her but isn't able to even pull his arm off of her, and he ends up pushing her to the ground. And then we watch Cordelia beat him up like a 5-year-old because this is how women who aren't slayers fight. In the next scene, Buffy complains to Giles again, and there's a line where she says,
"Getting the big picture here. I have no strength. I have no coordination. I throw knives like
A girl?
like I'm not the Slayer."
It's a line that has always stuck in my head because what do you mean like a girl? I thought like a girl was a good thing. Buffy is a girl. The entire episode is meant to show what would happen if Buffy didn't have her Slayer powers. Well, she would be completely helpless, apparently. She would be a girl. Like so little strength that she can't even open a jar of peanut butter. Buffy is obviously upset and depressed over this entire ordeal, and it's almost as if Buffy doesn't feel like herself if she can't fight, if she's not physically strong. Before becoming the Slayer, Buffy was a cheerleader. She was a pretty popular girl who hung out with other pretty popular girls. Towards the end of season 2, we get flashbacks of pre-Slayer Buffy, when she was just a shallow, talkative teen who only cared about boys and cheerleading and being pretty. Later, when she arrives in Sunnydale, she meets Cordelia on her first day of school, but when she witnesses Cordelia bullying Willow, she feels guilty and decides to befriend her instead, which makes her enemy number 1 for Cordelia. And the two begin this weird frenemy relationship and compete with each other for boys and the homecoming crown in season 3. Cordelia is supposed to be pre-Slayer Buffy. She's talkative, she's mean, and she's supposed to be an airhead, as they said in the 90s. She's vain, all she cares about is her reputation, looking pretty, and dating boys. Listen, I like Cordelia. I think Charisma Carpenter is great in this role, and I think Cordelia is funny. And also mean, but entertainingly mean. But the way she is written is a little curious. For example, throughout the first season, we see scenes of Cordelia bullying the Scooby Gang, and mostly sharing negative exchanges with Xander. We'll get to it. In season 2, we get this love-hate buildup of a relationship between Xander and Cordelia, and they start dating secretly, baking out in closets and whatnot. The reason they're keeping it a secret is because, well, Cordelia is embarrassed by him, as she should be. Sorry, he sucks. We'll get to it. And Xander doesn't want to hurt Willow, who has had a crush on him since they were kids. Willow eventually finds out, but is able to let go of Xander, at least for the rest of this season, and move on to Sweet Oz, who she did not deserve. Neither of these people deserve these people. And before you say, but Cordelia was mean, Xander is also mean. He's an asshole. In season 3, Xander and Willow start messing around behind their partners' backs. And this is after Cordelia sacrificed her reputation to be with him. Cordelia and Oz catch them in the act towards the middle of the season. And then Cordelia falls to the ground and a pole ends up impaling her stomach. She survives, thankfully, dumps Xander, burns all bridges with the Scooby Gang, and returns to school to see that her reputation is cooked. No one really likes her anymore, and she even gets bullied herself. Now, on some level, Cordelia is not a nice or empathetic person most of the time, and so people disliking her isn't necessarily breaking my heart, but I find it interesting because Xander is clearly a Joss Whedon insert, and the way he punishes Cordelia during the season is so fascinating to me. Because later in the prom episode, we learned that Cordelia, who was like Cher Horowitz, she was a rich girl with a nice expensive car and a daddy's girl, is now broke as fuck because her dad didn't pay his taxes.
But don't you already have all the dresses?
I have nothing, okay? No dresses, no cell phone, no car. Everything has been taken away because Daddy made a little mistake on his taxes for the last 12 years. Satisfied? Are you a happy Xander now? I'm broke.
And so she's working at this store to try and save up for a prom dress, but by the time prom rolls around, she still can't afford it. So Xander secretly buys it for her. This is his way of redeeming himself, I guess. It just feels like a way to make the audience like him again. I mean, I'm not sure how fans felt about Xander at the time or how they felt about him during the storyline, but to me, this is the last interesting thing that Xander does for the rest of the series. From here, he does not evolve in any way, and he also has a shit personality. He is so judgmental and self-righteous towards Buffy in so many moments throughout the show. And the show makes us agree with him a lot of the time. His hatred towards Angel was clearly just jealousy, as Buffy smartly points out in season 3. And it's Buffy who will apologize when he is being a bitch. And he's so fucking annoying. He will say some of the weirdest, dumbest, most unfunny fucking shit. I'm not gonna say I've never laughed at him. He definitely made me chuckle here and there, but for the most part, his presence was annoying to me. As much as Joss will wax poetic about strong female characters, Xander is threatened by the fact that Buffy is stronger than him, to the point that we have to get episodes like the one in season 2 where everyone magically turns into their costumes. So Buffy, who dressed up as an 18th century woman, is now a damsel in distress who faints all the time. And Xander, who dressed up as an army soldier, is now the strong, brave protector.
Something damn manly.
Get gone.
Oh, I'll forget about it. Maybe 15, 20 years when my rep for being a sissy man finally fades.
Xander,
A black guy heals, Buffy, but cowardice has an unlimited shelf life. Oh, thanks. Thanks a lot for your help.
Again, this very binary and stereotypical presentation of gender. What did 18th century women do? Well, they fainted all the time, apparently. At some point, he ended up kind of being like Enzo from the Vampire Diaries. He's just there, hanging around, acting entitled to the women he wanted to fuck, and for at least 3 seasons, low-key holds a grudge against Buffy for friend-zoning him. Lest we forget the pack episode where Xander and a group of bullies get turned into hyenas or some shit, and so they're really mean and antagonistic to kids at school, including Willow. There's a scene where Xander corners Buffy in a room while the rest of the pack eats the principal, and he tries to sexually assault her. I know hindsight is 20/20, but it's moments like this that make you uncomfortable because if Xander is Joss Whedon's self-insert, then Buffy is not the woman he sees himself in. She's the woman that he wants to be with, the one he wants to put his dick inside of. Buffy is not him. Buffy is his dream woman. As Lila Shapiro says in that Vulture article, his avatar was not a fearful young man, however, but a gorgeous girl with extraordinary courage. He wanted to be her, and he wanted to fuck her. I mean, to me, I think what he wanted was to be that guy like Xander. The I could if I wanted to guy.
Sure, I could get an A if I wanted to get an A, but who cares about an A? I don't. I don't care. Although I could have made that grade if I did care, but I don't.
The guy that everyone overlooks. The guy that never gets the girl, until one day he does, and saves the world. I did not mean for that to rhyme.
Xander.
Yes. It was he who got to her in time. He saved us all.
Or as I said earlier, whenever it's time to fight demons and vampires, he's extremely able to defend himself and fight back, and often wins and overpowers them. The fact that Xander is also someone who gets bullied and is ignored and bullied by hot mean girls, but soon gets the upper hand by getting the hot girlfriends who are obsessed with him, like Anya, whose entire personality revolves around him for most of her time on the show, is how Joss sees the world. He thinks men like this are entitled to women like that. To be clear again, I like Anya as well. She was basically just Cordelia 2.0 to me, honestly. And they were unique in their own ways, but they both are brutally honest, which is just a fancy way of saying rude. And they for some reason are attracted to Xander. And I'm not dunking on his looks per se, his personality is what makes him ugly to me. He's smug, he's rude, misogynistic, he has no long-term goals, he doesn't care about anything. Now he thinks he is like the shit. And that's Joss Whedon in a lot of ways. Going back to Cordelia in season 1, we see Buffy experience pangs of jealousy when he sees Cordelia and her popular jock friends. Cordelia is the old Buffy, but that version is bad because that Buffy was vain and dumb and didn't know how to fight. She was the hot mean girl in the horror movie who does get killed. Now from my eyes, and yes I know it's unfair to apply presentism to TV shows that came out in the 90s, but from my eyes that is not very feminist. Buffy being a feminist icon because she can fight like a man, unlike Cordelia, is not feminism. But because Joss grew up with a feminist mom and openly talks about his love of female characters and thinks feminism is just purely about women being like men, he thinks he doesn't have anything else to learn. This is the way he thinks feminism is, and so therefore that is what it is to him. And he doesn't need to do any more introspection. Because Joss does not seem like an okay guy to me, and I mean mentally. So many interviews are of him talking about power dynamics. He's always talking about Buffy being his way of letting out that resentment he had built up from being a bullied kid. This is why I separate the art from the artist is kind of impossible, because Joss in his personal life was very much enmeshed with his work. It's why that attempted rape scene is uncomfortable to watch, and is doubly uncomfortable when it happens again with Spike in season 6. Speaking of season 6, arguably one of the best seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The overarching story being about 3 incels who use magic to make themselves cooler and stronger and turn women who have rejected them into Stepford wives who call them master. Warren, their leader, becomes fixated on defeating the Slayer who, as she is wont to do, keeps ruining their plans to take control of Sunnydale. One of the key players in the trio is Jonathan, a recurring character who was revealed to be struggling with suicidal depression in season 3. Jonathan, due to his height and being a dweeb, as they said in the 90s, I'm pretty sure, faced bullying and ridicule from the taller, stronger, but dumber male jocks. After Buffy successfully talks him off the ledge and he presents a class protector award to her at the prom, Jonathan and Buffy become friendly acquaintances, kind of, and as we move through the next 2 seasons, we see Jonathan become entangled with 2 other rejected nerds, Andrew and Warren. Warren being the coldest and most heartless of the 3, and Jonathan being the only one with somewhat of a conscience. The trio's main goal is subduing Buffy, and there are numerous episodes wherein they are able to sneakily get one over on Buffy and the Scooby Gang. That is until their identity is revealed. When Buffy overpowers Warren with the help of Jonathan, he is so butthurt and humiliated that he shows up at her house the next day and shoots her, which, as many of you know, caused poor Tara to get caught in the crossfire. The storyline ends with Dark Willow literally skidding Warren and Andrew and Jonathan escaping Sunnydale. One of the darkest plot lines to take place during season 6 is the episode where Warren ends up killing his ex-girlfriend Katrina, who was under his magic compulsion and was in the process of being sexually assaulted by Warren, Andrew, and Jonathan. What makes the trio storyline so great and so timely is that it, as many have already pointed out, is extremely human, which is what makes it terrifying. The trio were not demons or mystical creatures. They were 3 human men who used their magic for evil. One of the first major red flags was the April bot, something Warren built to be his dream girlfriend until he decided he was bored of her, and left Buffy to deal with her dying body. Warren, in the way men are conditioned to be, did not see women as people. He saw them as inferior, things to take control of and dispose of once he's done with them, hence why he gets off on forcing women, conventionally attractive women, to treat him as if he's the greatest man who ever lived, and kiss the ground that he walks on. Knowing that fans would later make t-shirts that say Joss Whedon is my master now is notable, to say the least. In an oral history about the trio for Vulture, Jane Epstinson, the supervising producer and writer, said of the storyline, quote, "Ultimately for me, it's about how dangerous it can be to make anyone feel powerless. There's a very understandable reaction to being oppressed to say, well then, screw you. If we took more care to make sure no one in our society in their formative years feels bullied, then we'll have a better chance of them not striking out." Additionally, Adam Bush, who played Warren, said, "It kind of became an unspoken thing. If you want to relate it to things like Bin Laden, where you're looking at pure unadulterated evil in a world where evil monsters exist, Joss pointed it out. He who built a world of monsters that are evil for the sake of being evil, that sometimes evil is something we're all responsible for. Sometimes it's something that comes out of society, and they are a part of us. Sometimes it's just a pissed off underdog with a gun, and that's still relevant. There's evil that's just evil, and then there's the evil that's inside all of us. But it's just how we deal with it that matters." I think they both make some good points, but I would like to expound upon it. Because while it is true that people who feel powerless, especially men or cis straight white men, will oftentimes act out that deep-seated rage on other people, that's not a result of evilness, it's a result of patriarchy. Patriarchy which teaches men to be violent and to dominate women, and that is what makes them men. But you're not allowed to say that anymore because, like I said earlier, people don't like it when you call a thing because people don't actually understand that thing. People don't understand what patriarchy is or what it entails, and it's why you have men like Joss Whedon who claim to get it, clearly not getting it, even when they are, whether unknowingly or not, writing themselves into a storyline about 3 villainous nerds who treat women terribly. Like with Warren, Joss also enjoyed being seen as his fans' master. And as with old Hugo and, well, a certain other male feminist we'll be discussing later, he is also racist. In the summer of 2020, actor Ray Fisher put out the following tweet. Joss Whedon's on-set treatment of the cast and crew of Justice League was gross, abusive, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable. He was enabled in many ways by Jeff Johns and John Berg. In a great 2021 Hollywood Reporter article, they interview Ray Fisher and detail how the entire story went down. So I highly recommend reading that because I'm going to do a very brief synopsis of what happened. Also because I haven't seen Justice League, I don't really watch comic book movies other than the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. So in 2020, Ray Fisher came out and accused Joss Whedon of racist, unprofessional behavior on the set of the 2017 flop Justice League. This story connects to what we talked about earlier with morality versus ethics, and how things like harassment and microaggressions are not always taken seriously as forms of abuse in workplace settings. Ray had to deal with consistent microaggressions being made by Joss and the other producers. Ray says a witness told him that the higher-ups were discussing how they couldn't have an angry black man at the center of the film, and another story in which Ray made some suggestions about the script and Joss responding like he was offended because he doesn't take notes from anyone apparently. The nice thing about this story is that both Gal Gadot and Jason Momoa, who starred alongside him, came to Ray's defense and both ended up coming out speaking openly about their own bad interactions with Joss Whedon. One in which Joss threatened Gal Gadot after she expressed discontent with some of her lines, saying she needs to shut up and say the lines and that he could make her look incredibly stupid in this movie. So Joss says, no, I didn't say that. See, Gal, English isn't her first language. She just misunderstood me is all. I don't threaten people. Who does that? He concluded she had misunderstood him. English is not her first language, and I tend to be annoyingly flowery in my speech. Fucking asshole.
Okay, but what did you mean when you said our love story can finally begin?
Our what? Our love story? I didn't say that. You said that.
What?
Josh, I think you need to take a moment and figure out why you're so fixated on every little thing I supposedly said, because it feels like you're an emotional stenographer right now.
A few months after Ray Fisher came out with these allegations and called out Warner Bros. Producers Jeff Johns and John Berg for enabling the behavior and constantly gaslighting Ray Fisher about what he was going through, Charisma Carpenter posted a letter about her time with Joss Whedon on Buffy and Angel to Twitter. I'm not going to read all of it, but I will read a few passages because it's sad, but it's so well written, and I really respect and appreciate Charisma for doing this. For nearly 2 decades, I have held my tongue and even made excuses for certain events that traumatized me to this day. Joss Whedon abused his power on numerous occasions while working together on the sets of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. While he found his misconduct amusing, it only served to intensify my performance anxiety, disempower me, and alienate me from my peers. The disturbing incidents triggered a chronic physical condition from which I still suffer. It is with a beating heavy heart that I say I coped in isolation and at times destructively. Last summer, when Ray Fisher publicly accused Joss of abusive and unprofessional behavior toward the cast and crew during reshoots on the Justice League set in 2017, It gutted me. Joss has a history of being casually cruel. He has created hostile and toxic work environments since his early career. I know because I experienced it firsthand, repeatedly, like his ongoing passive-aggressive threats to fire me, which wreaks havoc on a young actor's self-esteem, and callously calling me fat to colleagues when I was 4 months pregnant. He was mean and biting, disparaging about others openly, and often played favorites, pitting people against one another to compete and vie for his attention and approval. He called me in for a sit-down meeting to interrogate and berate me regarding a rosary tattoo I got to help me feel more spiritually grounded in an increasingly volatile work climate that affected me physically. With tears swelling, I feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility to Ray and others for remaining private about my experience with Joss and the suffering it has caused me. It is abundantly evident that Joss has persisted in his harmful actions, continuing to create wreckage in his wake. My hope now, by finally coming forward about these experiences, is to create space for the healing of others who I know have experienced similar serialized abuses of power. Towards the end of this heartbreaking letter, she says that when she was pregnant, Joss asked her if she was going to keep it, which is... what is wrong with this man? She was made to report to work at 1 a.m. when her doctor recommended she cut down her work hours, and then was fired after she had her baby. On top of that, the late Michelle Trachtenberg confirmed during that time that there was an informal rule that Joss was not allowed to be alone with her. This came after an incident where someone witnessed Michelle coming out of his office looking shaken. We don't know what happened, and now that Michelle has sadly passed away, we probably never will. But something clearly happened. I don't think that rule would have been implemented for no reason. This is not something someone who cares about and empathizes with women would do. We need look no further than the women he was romantically involved with, the women he worked with. It's ironic how there are 2 moments in Buffy where Buffy sleeps with a man and is punished for it. Once when Angel literally turns evil after they fuck for the first time, and the other in the beginning of season 4 when she has a one-night stand with this cute guy she liked, and he treats her like garbage afterward. This is the aspect of Joss that irks me. He looks down on men who do things like this, and yet he was doing things like this to the women in his life and was actively cheating on his wife as he was writing the show. In that Equality Now speech, when imitating a press junket interview, he says,
How is it possible that this is even a question? Honestly, seriously, why did you write that down? Why aren't you asking 100 other guys why they don't write strong women characters?
Yeah, why don't you guys write strong female characters? I'm practically an expert at it. Like, no, you're not. With Hugo, it was also an ego thing. Getting off on getting attention from women because they think you're a safe person. I think he, like Xander, is an entitled, insecure, and pathetic man who was bullied and decided to use his power to take out his high school resentment on the people he worked with, the people who helped make his art. The sad thing is, I understand that resentment. I experienced emotional abuse at the hands of a family member, and I also experienced bullying and alienation when I was growing up in school. I very much relate to not just feeling like the underdog in your own family, but also the hellmouth as a metaphor for high school thing. I hated high school. The resentment that you have is tied to this feeling of shame, embarrassment, and wanting to rewrite the past. It's hard to think about the things people said to you that really affected how you felt about yourself and how you see yourself now. It hurts when you think about how much that experience really affected you on an emotional level. So in some ways, I understand wanting to use your art to let out that resentment. In fact, that seems and sounds healthy. The problem is that Joss was not a healthy person, and while we are all flawed, and I myself am not always mentally healthy, that resentment morphed into entitlement, rather than compassion and empathy. It made him a shitty person. And while none of us are perfect, we'll talk about that phrase later as well, Joss was a mean and nasty, egotistical person who went out of his way to hurt people. I don't blame his fans for admiring him in the past. I admired him at one point. But that love is part of what gassed him up so much, and that's the problem with glorifying these male feminists. Like Rebecca Holman said, I don't think men should be ruled out of feminism. And I don't think these shitty men should define all male feminists. There are men out there committed to the movement, have solidarity with women, and do not receive the same amount of glamorization. Like something Kat Tenbarge said in an interview with Matt Bernstein, it's important that we don't let misogyny go unchecked just because we're excited about a man who cares about women's rights. And even if you are excited, that doesn't mean you have to treat them as though they are exceptional and then proceed to idolize them. Some people think that if you know better, you'll do better. And that's also not totally true. Knowing is not always the same as doing, especially when your knowledge of a very complex movement is so surface level. Feminism is about more than just equality, it's about equity, it's about ending widespread oppression for everyone. It's anti-capitalist, it's intersectional, and it condemns power dynamics, it doesn't promote them. It's not enough to know things if you are not willing to actually change how you see women in the world and be more self-aware. Bell Hooks articulates this perfectly in The Will to Change. No man who does not actively choose to work to change and challenge patriarchy escapes its impact. The most passive, kind, quiet man can come to violence if the seeds of patriarchal thinking have been embedded in his psyche. Much of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde behavior women describe in men who are alternatively caring, then abusive, has its roots in this fundamental allegiance to patriarchal thinking. Indoctrination into the mindset begun in childhood includes a psychological initiation that requires boys to accept that their willingness to do violent acts makes them patriarchal men. A distinction can and must be made between the willingness to do violent acts and actually doing them. When researchers looking at date rape interviewed a range of college men and found that many of them saw nothing wrong with forcing a woman sexually, they were astounded. Their findings seemed to challenge the previously accepted notion that rape was aberrant male behavior. While it may be unlikely any of the men in the study were or became rapists, it was evident that given what they conceived as the appropriate circumstance, they could see themselves being sexually violent. Unconsciously, they engage in patriarchal thinking, which condones rape, even though they may never enact it. This is a patriarchal truism that most people in our society want to deny. Whenever women thinkers, especially advocates of feminism, speak about the widespread problem of male violence, folks are eager to stand up and make the point that most men are not violent. They refuse to acknowledge that masses of boys and men have been programmed from birth on to believe that at some point they must be violent, whether psychologically or physically, to prove that they are men. But does any of this mean that we have to let Buffy go? Absolutely not. I put out a poll asking you guys your conflicted feelings on the series, now knowing what we know about Joss and of the working conditions on the set of Buffy. As of this recording, 60% of you said you still love the show, but there were a few comments from people who admitted that they couldn't go back, or that they were watching it with a more critical eye than before. I think all of that is fine. I still think Buffy is an amazing show. I still think Buffy is an amazing character in spite of its flaws. As I discussed in a recent video, it's okay to have complicated feelings about Buffy. Buffy, like with Harry Potter, has always been closely tied with its creator, in the same way Martin Scorsese's films are closely tied to him or Jordan Peele or Stanley Kubrick. We see the name under directed by, and we give them all the credit and praise in this film or TV show we consider a masterpiece. But that is not fair. There are so many people listed in those credits. All of those people, all of them, contributed to this piece of work. You can still love Buffy simply because SMG is a huge part of what made her iconic. As one of you wrote, 144 episodes over 7 years employed possibly thousands of people. Should we disregard all of their skills, their talents, hard work because their boss was an asshole? We'd be separating the art from an army of artists, not just Whedon. Creative directors, producers, cinematographers, costume, makeup, set design, grips, gaffers, staff writers, film editors, SFX and VFX, main cast, guest stars, script coordinators, revisions teams, extras, stunt coordinators, stunt performers, and fight choreographers. The suffering they survived to make the art will have been for nothing if we erase the show from pop culture history. Like if Buffy had just let the world end after the hell she went through protecting it. I agree with this. Buffy shouldn't be erased because its creator was a gross bully. Because even though he contributed to the creation and evolution of Buffy Summers, and even though he saw himself in Buffy Summers, I think if anything, Buffy was the person he wanted to be, but for whatever reason, couldn't. In that Vulture article, he again, like Hugo, is just honest enough about his mistakes as to convince you that he's self-aware. He was aware that he did not treat the women in his life with any respect, but because he relished the power he had so much, he refused to do anything about it or even try. Buffy was kind and caring and protected those who were weaker than her, and overall, it was really important for her to do the right thing and use her power to help those who had none, rather than using it to her own sinister advantage. To repeat, she wasn't doing this for rewards. She was doing it out of the goodness of her heart. She was doing it because she actually cared. Nobody ever fell from a pedestal into anything but a pit, Whedon told me on a call one day. A few months had passed since our conversations at his house. In that time, he'd finally made peace with himself, he said. Could I have done Marriage better, he asked. Don't get me started. Could I have been a better showrunner? Absolutely. Should I have been nicer? He considered the question. Perhaps he could have been calmer, more direct. But would that not have compromised the work? Maybe the problem was he'd been too nice, he said. He wanted people to love him, which meant when he was direct, people thought he was harsh. In any case, he decided he was done worrying about all of that. People had been using every weaponizable word of the modern era to make it seem like I was an abusive monster, he said. I think I'm one of the nicer showrunners that's ever been. So, Most of you probably don't remember the first time gender stereotypes were imposed on you. You probably don't remember why you began playing with Barbies or Hot Wheels, or why you enjoyed playing with toys that resembled cooking utensils or even cleaning tools rather than video games and footballs or baseball bats. Some of you probably were able to play with both, and those of you who did were most likely girls and femmes. See, girls are given a little more leeway when it comes to the kind of hobbies they want to engage in. When I was younger, I loved playing video games. One of my first video games and video game consoles was Super Mario Sunshine for the GameCube. It's cubicle, as they say. See, I have 2 older sisters, and my oldest sister has 4 sons now. And when I was younger, 2 of my youngest nephews and I would play video games together. My oldest nephew loves video games. Like, he's your archetypal nerdy gamer dude who does not play sports nor has ever liked a sport, which was perfect because I don't care for sports either. So my nephews and I always kind of had the same interests and we always played together. Even when I played with my dolls or my Polly Pockets, he would play along with his action figures, like his Power Rangers and Mega Mans.
Are you still playing with that doll? Action figures, that's so hard to understand.
I never experienced feeling alienated from my nephews due to our gender differences because they enjoyed things that I technically wasn't supposed to be into, but was never discouraged from engaging in. My mom was never that restrictive about it, and that includes my nephews. One of the shows that we would always watch was the Powerpuff Girls, which at the time, when Cartoon Network was good, was always airing on the channel alongside other classic cartoons. My nephews loved the Powerpuff Girls, and spoiler, they still do. But you know who didn't like it? Their dad. Their dad, who is like if toxic masculinity was a person. Like, he embodies everything about a man, about a person really, that I hate. Homophobic, misogynistic, fatphobic, transphobic, all the phobics. When he found out that they were watching the Powerpuff Girls, he pulled little me aside and gave me a talking to. He was like, Aaliyah, you can't watch that show with them. That show is for girls. And I was just like, okay. I don't remember exactly what was going through my head, and I don't recall how old I was. I know I was little. I just remember being confused. And what was funny is that when my nephews brought this up, they brought it up in a very eye-rolly way because they liked the show. Their dad made it seem like I'd forced them to watch this show when I didn't. They liked it. That's why they watched it, and so we decided to continue watching it. We had to watch a stupid-ass kids show in secret because their dad's masculinity is as fragile as a cracker that's been soaked in water. Watching the Powerpuff Girls in his eyes was the pathway to them becoming gay, I guess. This is also why, ladies, if you consider yourself a feminist or a progressive and you are straight or you date men, do not date men who don't seem overtly misogynistic but are homophobic as fuck. I think that has nothing to do with you, because it does. As with my nephews, them watching a girly show was seen as them engaging in feminine coded media, and therefore that makes them less than. And if gay men are seen as feminine, they are viewed the same way. They are viewing femininity as less than as a whole. It's a huge part of why boys get bullied by other boys if they are perceived as being feminine in any way, which could mean anything, including being fat. They will most likely be called gay or a girl, which is the same thing in their minds. Homophobia, transphobia, fatphobia, colorism, misogyny all intersect in a lot of ways. You can't separate the misogyny from the homophobia or the other phobias for that matter. From young age, children, regardless of gender, are taught in one way or another that anything feminine is meant to be viewed as inferior to anything masculine. At that moment with their dad, I was being told that even though it's okay for me to engage in their interests, my interests are too girly for them to engage in. So what do you think that does for boys? I remember when my nephews got a little older and my second oldest nephew was really into My Little Pony but was deeply embarrassed about it. My mom, his brother, and I reminded him that it wasn't a big deal. We knew how ridiculous his dad was, and so we promised we wouldn't say anything. As flawed as my mom is, she never made them feel ashamed for being into some girly stuff. I mean, most of my family is pretty homophobic, but when it came to this, she just literally didn't think it was that deep. I don't know if he still watches the Powerpuff Girls or My Little Pony or not, but I'm sure it's not something he watched with his male friends. Usually when they are watching that stuff, it's with me because they know I'm not going to judge them. When boys are taught to view anything associated with girls and femininity as inferior, it's how they eventually grow to view and later treat women. These ideas might seem natural and harmless by parents and adults who reinforce them in children, but they aren't. They have long-lasting consequences. consequences that typically harm girls and femmes more than boys, but also significantly harm boys as well. In a research paper for Sage Journals called A Bioecological Theory of Sexual Harassment in Girls, they intelligently lay out how the media, combined with our family upbringing, school, and our peers, perpetuate gender stereotypes that ultimately lead to the pervasive sexual harassment and abuse that girls and women endure from their male peers before they're even in high school. Before someone pops out of a trash can to tell me that boys experience sexual harassment as well, this research paper details how, while that is true, girls tend to report sexual harassment from boys at a much higher rate, which can also mean a myriad of things, like boys not always feeling comfortable expressing that kind of harm that was done to them because of patriarchy. But it is never untrue that any kind of person can sexually harass or assault, and any kind of person can be sexually assaulted or harassed. However, statistically speaking, men tend to be the main culprits of these things, and it's not innate. As with that quote I read earlier from Adam Bush, this isn't some evil that exists inside of men, it is something that we teach them in various insidious ways. And it ends up teaching girls to accept their place as the inferior gender, and they learn to shrink themselves. Because we grow up believing that these behaviors from boys are innate, when girls experience sexual harassment from boys, it is often not reprimanded by the adults in their lives. How many of us have been told, "Oh, he probably just likes you," by a teacher who just witnessed some stupid boy relentlessly picking on you? Girls are inundated with messages telling them that they should expect boys to be annoying assholes who are so bad at expressing their feelings that they will just make your life a living hell instead. And you just put up with it because boys will be boys. Like, you really sit and think about these things and you wonder, how do people not see how this conditioning is what contributes to rape culture? How it contributes to our lack of understanding of rape culture? What is rape? What is sexual harassment? What is abuse?
In the year 2025, by this point, I think many people have probably heard the term rape culture at some point, but I'm not sure many people know what it means. It refers to the idea that rape and sexual abuse are commonplace and normalized in our communities, as well as media and entertainment, as the result of the community's attitudes and misunderstandings about gender, sexuality, gender roles, and sex. And I think Aziz Ansari's accuser's story perfectly illustrates how our society, our cultural understanding or misunderstanding of sex, and how we go about teaching boys and men to pursue sex, to see women, as well as how we go about teaching girls and women about sex, create scenarios where people are casually, regularly, and most importantly and insidiously, unintentionally engaging in sexually inappropriate and coercive conduct, i.e. rape culture.
What are any of these things if we have been essentially teaching boys and girls to enact and endure these acts, to minimize these acts and propagate victim blaming?
He didn't assault anybody, he asked for permission. I don't know, I still think he should be allowed to perform at the cellar.
Because what did he do wrong? Ask for consent? For non-contact? And like, what are you talking about?
Like with Mr. McAllister, he knew that a mentally disabled girl being assaulted by a bunch of boys was transparently cruel and wrong, but Tracy Flick, an underage teenage girl being groomed and assaulted by her grown-as-fuck teacher, seemed to rack his brain. He couldn't muster up any empathy for a clear and cut victim as Tracy. Why? Because many of us still don't understand rape, manipulation, grooming, rape culture, or patriarchy. Because even though this is a great research paper and I highly recommend you all go and read it, it falters in not naming patriarchy as the source of these problems, the source of this conditioning. There's a part in the first few paragraphs at the beginning where they say, although holding stereotypes does not always result in discriminatory behavior, we assert that the sexual harassment of girls by boys is a direct behavioral consequence of sexualized gender stereotypes, in the same way that racial discrimination is a behavioral consequence of racial stereotypes. Like, no. Racial discrimination is not a direct behavioral consequence of racial stereotypes. Racial discrimination is a direct result of racism, which is not just a social prejudice, but a system that promotes white supremacy and subjugates people of color. Sexual harassment is not a direct result of gender stereotypes. It's a part of it, but where do gender stereotypes come from? Say it with me, patriarchy. We will never solve this problem if we cannot even name the source of the fucking problem. As a problematic boomer once said, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. Listen, I don't fuck with Dr. Phil anymore, but he was right when he said that shit. He was. A broke clock is right twice a day. Patriarchy is the single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit in our nation. Yet most men do not use the word patriarchy in everyday life. Most men never think about patriarchy, what it means, how it is created and sustained. Many men in our nation would not be able to spell the word or pronounce it correctly. The word patriarchy just is not part of their normal everyday thought or speech. Men who have heard and know the word usually associate it with women's liberation, with feminism, and therefore dismiss it as irrelevant to their own experiences. I have been standing at podiums talking about patriarchy for more than 30 years. It is a word I use daily, and men who hear me use it often ask me what I mean by it. Patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence.
How do I get through to you boys that football isn't about rape? It's about violently dominating anyone that stands between you and what you want. And you gotta get yourself into the mindset that you are God's. Yeah. And you are entitled to this. Yeah. That other team, they ain't just gonna lay down and give it to you. No. But you gotta go out there and take it.
During the 2010s, when toxic masculinity, an academic term, became a buzzword on the internet, the term itself began to lose its significance and became just as derogatory and trivial as woke or cancel culture. Terms that at one point had definite meanings were used to address specific issues and got co-opted by usually conservatives who completely distilled and watered down the meanings of those terms and then used them as a weapon against marginalized people. Conservatives claim that toxic masculinity was an attack on masculinity itself. It attacked men and was making a blanket statement about all men being toxic. Then there are people on the left who don't actually understand the term, claiming that we should use different words so men don't get defensive. The term toxic masculinity did not originate in the women's lib movement necessarily. It actually originated in the mythopoetic men's movement in the 1980s. In an article from The Conversation by Michael Flood, they say, quote, "The movement focused on men's healing, using male-only workshops, wilderness retreats, and rites of passage to rescue what it saw as essentially masculine qualities and archetypes. The king, the warrior, the wild man, and so on, from what it dubbed toxic masculinity. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the term spread to other self-help circles and into academic work, for example, on men's mental health. Some U.S. conservatives began applying the term to low-income, underemployed, marginalized men, prescribing solutions like restoring male-dominated families and family values. Toxic masculinity was virtually non-existent in academic writing, including feminist scholarship, up until 2015 or so, other than in a handful of texts on men's health and well-being. Now, the mythopoetic men's movement has its problems, as most men's movements do, but for the people who think toxic masculinity is just some sick dig that feminists came up with to lobby at men, that's not how it happened. But it really doesn't matter because the term alone is what ignites a lot of men. I agree that the term has been misused in a lot of ways by people, as with most academic or even therapeutic terms that reach the internet. The words get spread around like a game of telephone, and people end up misusing these words that are actually very important to understand. It's like how earlier with Hugo saying that the term white feminism is an abusive term targeted at people who actually want to make change. Like, no, it's not. I remember getting a comment under my Amy Schumer video telling me that not all white feminists are racist or bigoted, and like, yeah, I know. White feminism does not mean white women who are feminists. It means a type of feminism that prioritizes the needs of privileged white women. It ignores the more dire needs of marginalized women, meaning anyone can perpetuate white feminism. When I critique white feminism, I am not critiquing feminism as a whole, as if white feminism is feminism. The point of that video was to show how this isn't real feminism, and how when people's feminist politics only seem to benefit them or people like them, it proceeds to keep marginalized women and people down. When feminists critique toxic masculinity, they are not saying masculinity is inherently toxic, but that the kind of masculinity that is taught to men tends to be toxic and hurts everyone. Even that Conversation article insists at the end that we should avoid using terms like patriarchal masculinity as not to scare off men. First, it's don't say toxic masculinity, then it's don't say patriarchal masculinity, then it's don't say masculinity at all. It's frustrating because this isn't helpful and it doesn't get us anywhere. When men complain about these terms and get defensive, it doesn't feel that much different than when white people get defensive over black people talking about systemic racism or critical race theory, or when thin people get defensive when fat people talk about fat phobia and thin privilege. Marginalized people, women, fat people, are constantly being told to coddle the ones who have more privilege than you, in order to get them to listen. But why? Why is that? Well, it's a little thing called internalized dominance. So what is internalized dominance? Well, in my mom video, I talked about the concept of internalized oppression. something that specifically, keep that in mind, specifically affects the oppressed, have some kind of internalized bigotry. In my experience, this is usually coming from people who don't seem to understand what internalized oppression actually means. And misconstruing this concept as something that affects all of us is harmful because not only does it ignore how internalized oppression shows up, it also causes us to not understand the complexities of oppression and how it works. In a nutshell, internalized oppression is, as Professor Laura M. Padilla puts it, those at the receiving end of prejudice can experience physical and psychological harm, and over time they internalize and act on negative perceptions about themselves and other members of their own group. White people cannot internalize anti-blackness because they do not experience anti-blackness. Then people who have never been fat cannot internalize fat phobia. Fat people internalize fat phobia because it is their experience as fat people. Men cannot internalize misogyny. Women internalize misogyny because it is what we experience. Does that make sense? So if internalized oppression affects the oppressed, then what do the people with privilege internalize? Dominance. If you belong to a group of people who have been deemed superior or more superior in relation to other groups, you will internalize that sense of superiority. For example, when fat people talk about fat shaming and a skinny Oscar the Grouch pops out of the trash can to say, well, what about skinny shaming? That attitude, that knee-jerk reaction to seeing your experience not being centered, is internalized dominance. You feel that because your issues as a thin person are not being brought to the forefront in this conversation around body shaming, that somehow means your issues are being ignored. When women are talking about rape against women committed by men, a male Oscar the Grouch pops out of the trash can to say, well, men get raped too. What about the men? That internalized dominance tells men, in particular cis straight men, that when women are talking about their sexual assault experiences, their horrific experiences with men, that is somehow detrimental to men's traumatic experiences, and that is an indictment on men to focus on sexual assault that men commit against women. Then people are not that much different. Conversations around fat phobia that lead to people suddenly deciding to care about skinny shaming comes from this feeling that privileged people have when being confronted with their own privilege. People are uncomfortable with the idea that they may benefit from being who they are. They feel attacked because they feel like, well, I didn't ask to be white. I didn't ask to be a man. Why are you blaming me? And it's like, we're not blaming you, hun. We're just trying to tell you how you might be blind to how much easier your life may be due to a privilege you may not have chosen to have. That doesn't mean you don't have other problems. Doesn't mean that your life is perfect. It just means that you do not deal with specific issues because of your privilege. And if learning about these things makes you uncomfortable, deal with it. Suck it up. I am not offended to learn that even I, as a small fat person, have immense privilege and do not experience the level of fat phobia that people who are 3 times my size experience. I am not offended when trans women talk about their experiences as trans women. I don't feel the urge to cut them off and tell them to center my experiences as a cis woman instead, because everyone deserves to have a space where they can talk about their marginalization and focus on their problems. Now that we're in this anti-intellectual, the friend that's too woke era, people have decided that being uncomfortable or feeling shame is just inherently evil, and they should just run in the opposite direction if they are made to feel uncomfortable or guilty about their privilege. Being uncomfortable is not inherently bad, nor is being ashamed. History is complicated and messy, and if learning about how and why our country is so racist or fatphobic or ableist makes you uncomfortable, that's a good thing. As Michael Hobbs used to say on You're Wrong About, history should make you feel weird and it should make you feel bad. Feeling bad can sometimes motivate people to be better, to learn and to fight for change. Learning about patriarchy and misogyny and toxic masculinity should make you uncomfortable, and it should push you to fight against these things. Marginalized people should not have to tiptoe around their language and coddle you so that you can give a shit. I, as a dark-skinned, poor black woman, do not get to opt out of discomfort. I have to deal with discomfort every single fucking day of my life. I grew up around racist-ass white kids who are not secretive about their hatred of me. I've worked with men who will say blatantly misogynistic things to my face, and if I say something, I will be seen as an oversensitive feminist killjoy. I'll be seen as an angry black woman. I will be seen as being belligerent. Black people in work settings have to whisper when talking about white people so that white people don't get offended. It's so fucking annoying because it doesn't matter how nice you are. Bell Hooks is one of the nicest feminists to men that I've ever seen, but I can see a man reading The Will to Change. As much as it is critical of women as it is of men, I could see them reading that and being offended by it because it is insisting that men have to be willing to change. People want to sit in their ignorance and they don't want to feel like they are being blamed for something. But the problem is, sometimes you are to blame. You most likely have been racist, misogynistic, fatphobic, ableist, transphobic, etc. Most men are misogynistic. Most white people are racist. Most people are fatphobic. But instead of contending with that, we just tell marginalized people, black people, women, fat people, that most people aren't like this, so be quiet, I guess. Let's just sit with that and not deal with the problem because it'll hurt people's feelings. It's not fair. And before some boomer interjects to say life's not fair, life should not be this unfair. It should be fairer. We just don't want it to be. The reason that I felt so compelled to make this video is because these issues upset me. They enrage me. I am passionate about these issues, so much so that it actually negatively impacts my mood. When I witness bigotry from people in my life, online, at work, wherever, it will put me in a sour mood. As it should, and frankly, I want you to be upset too so that you can care and again join the fight. Anger can be a toxic emotion, but it is not inherently toxic. Anger is a valid feeling in the same way that sadness or being happy are valid feelings. It's just the way that you deal with that anger that matters. I want you to be angry about white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. I want you to be incensed over how much it has caused harm to you, your friends, your family, your peers. Because we should all be angry at this system and we should all want something better. But if, like Belle said, you haven't divested from patriarchy and haven't even tried to begin the work of unpacking your toxic masculinity and misogyny, racism, whatever, then yeah, you're going to get defensive over terms you don't actually understand. You're going to assert dominance in marginalized circles. And you're going to end up like a Joss Whedon or a Louis C.K.
Let's bring in our next guest, comedian Louis C.K., whom some might describe as an aficionado of masturbation, a man who is well known for being a prolific masturbator, who even brags about it. Is that fair to say, Louis?
It's easy and it's fun and nobody gets hurt.
In that Vulture article by Lila Shapiro that I was reading from about Joss Whedon, one of the people who worked with Whedon talked about how there was this, what they call, cult of silence around him, otherwise known as a conspiracy of silence, which describes the behavior of a group of people that by unspoken consensus does not mention, discuss, or acknowledge a given subject. We usually hear this term in reference to powerful, famous men in Hollywood who have been exposed as predators, or at least during the height of the co-opting of Me Too in 2017. This can also refer to families. There are many families that have a long history of, say, sexual abuse, and if the person who was violated wants to seek justice or expose the family member who did the violating, they might be shunned from the family or pressured to keep it hidden. One of the biggest flaws in the co-opting of Me Too during that time is that it was, in my opinion, too focused on putting away certain bad men and not widening the discussion around how people who amass power and abuse it are not doing that alone. What is it that continues to enable this behavior? Yes, Harvey Weinstein, piece of shit, but he's not the last piece of shit, and it's not as though no one in Hollywood knew. People like to discredit victims who come forward against lovable, likable men by saying, why didn't you come forward when it happened? Especially when it comes to Bill Cosby, since many of these assaults took place as far back as like the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. When a lot of time has gone by, people think it's suspicious that, oh, now you suddenly want to come forward about your story. Ignoring the fact that sexual assault and harassment are extremely traumatic experiences that send victims on a roller coaster of emotions, where they can feel humiliated, violated, betrayed, numb even. Or the fact that in the case of Cosby, the women were drugged and not all of them were aware that they had been assaulted. I find it strange that people still don't understand that victims of sexual harassment and assault are set up to fail. Sometimes they do come forward at the time and they are silenced or threatened or blackmailed or fired before the story can even reach mainstream media. During the height of Me Too, if you didn't know, a lot of men were accused of sexual assault and misconduct. Now, did most of these men actually suffer severe consequences? No. At best, we put at least 4 men away, one of them now exonerated. And to be fair, as much as we still don't understand, we did begin to reorient how we think about consent, and that is still ongoing because the girls are still confused. At worst, Me Too made a lot of noise and convinced a bunch of people that the industry was actually going to change. But at the time, it did seem like all of these men were going down to the point that we don't even remember or acknowledge how many stories got completely buried under all the chaos. Somehow celebrities started getting tipped off that something might come out about them. So they decided, I guess smartly, to try and get ahead of the story before it blew up. The late Morgan Spurlock, aka the guy who went on the famous McDiet and Super Size Me, wrote a long statement on Twitter in 2017 saying that he behaved inappropriately with a woman he met in college, also admitting to cheating on every single woman he's ever been with and sexually harassing his female employees. In 2018, Ryan Seacrest wrote a letter issued to The Hollywood Reporter saying that he was gut-wrenched over allegations that had been brought against him from his ex-stylist named Susie Hardy, even though she didn't officially come forward publicly until a couple of weeks later in an article for Variety. And lastly, Louis C.K. After multiple women who'd accused him of asking them to watch him play with his dick, not long after these allegations came out, Louis C.K. seemingly owned up to them in a statement from the New York Times. Leaning more into the music industry side of things, when Straight Outta Compton came out in 2015, it received enormous critical acclaim, but also omitted the infamous story of what Dr. Dre did to former journalist Dee Barnes. In 1991, a 19-year-old hip-hop journalist, Dee Barnes, was brutally attacked by Dr. Dre at a record release party. The catalyst for this attack was an interview Dee Barnes did with Ice Cube, who threw some shade at NWA, and so Dr. Dre decided she deserved to be beaten to a pulp for something that Ice Cube said.
Well, maybe it is stupid, but it's also dumb.
When he ran into a 22-year-old Dee Barnes in a Hollywood nightclub on January 27, 1991, Dee Barnes said he picked her up by her hair unprovoked and began slamming her head in the right side of her body repeatedly against a brick wall near the stairway, as his bodyguard held off the crowd with a gun. And after he tried to throw her down the stairs and failed, he began kicking her in the ribs and hands. She escaped and ran into the women's restroom, and he followed her. He followed her into the women's restroom and grabbed her from behind by the hair again and proceeded to punch her in the back of the head before he and his bodyguard ran from the building.
Before someone feels the urge to defend Dr. Dre because he was drunk or because he was young, as he would go on to later say, or because you think this was the only time he was violent against a woman, I regret to inform you that she was not the first nor the last woman to be physically attacked by Dr. Dre. In 1990, at a post-Grammys party, musician Terry B says she was punched twice by a drunk Dr. Dre, and his longtime girlfriend at the time, Michelle, has recounted suffering abuse from Dre during the duration of their relationship. The reason I'm grouping these men together is that I find the way they've responded to these allegations to be illuminating. In Ryan Seacrest's article in The Hollywood Reporter, he says in November of 2017 he received a letter from Susie's lawyer, which claimed that he had mistreated Susie on numerous occasions when she worked for him from 2007 to 2013. In a supposedly innocuous way, he says that these accusations came out during an unprecedented public reckoning by women in our industry and beyond, courageously coming forward to share their stories, many of them heartbreaking. These women sought to bring attention to the systemic gender inequality that has occurred for decades. I was, and am, amazed at their bravery. I love how he brings up that these accusations arrived during Me Too. Like, that feels super calculated to me. Like he's subtly implying that she is just jumping on a trend and is trying to get money or attention. A couple of paragraphs down, he says, "To have my workplace conduct questioned was gut-wrenching. I've always aimed to treat all of my colleagues with honesty, respect, kindness, and compassion. Yet I knew, regardless of the confidence I had, that there was no merit to the allegations. My name would likely soon appear on the list of those suspected of despicable words and deeds. The pressures of our overflowing news feeds would insist on it. I absolutely want to be a part of the change, the progress that is coming. I did not want to be a postscript of evidence of its cause." Most of us agree that the presumption of innocence is an important standard. We are taught early on that it's essential to see all sides, to give everyone a chance to explain and to check for exculpatory evidence that may have been missed. At a time when improper interactions between men and women, particularly in the workplace, are part of a national conversation, we must find a way to ensure that everyone, the public, private, and public institutions, accusers, and alleged accused, is given the opportunity for a swift and fair review. My job is to listen. Beyond listening, which I will continue in earnest, I also ask questions and try to help voices be heard. It isn't lost on me that my platforms, radio, TV, social media, can be powerful conduits for change. He sounds very contemptuous of the Me Too movement. If I hadn't spoken out, my name would have been included in the list of rapists and monsters, and the story would gain a life of its own, and wouldn't that be so unfair? But we'll come back to Ryan in a minute. Moving on to Morgan Spurlock, who in 2017 sent out a string of tweets that began with him talking about watching his heroes fall as a result of Me Too. Got him wondering, will I be next? Will they come for me? And then says that he realizes that he isn't an innocent bystander, but that he is in fact part of the problem. The story goes, he was in college. He and a girl got drunk, went back to his dorm room. When they started fooling around, she pushed him off. Then after some talking and laughing, they started messing around again and began having sex. Then she began crying, and so they stopped. He says, quote, "I tried to comfort her to make her feel better. I thought I was doing okay. I believed she was feeling better. She believed she was raped. That's why I'm part of the problem." He later admits to being an alcoholic from the time he was 13 years old and reveals he hasn't been sober in 30 years. I talked about this in my Super Size Me video because this obviously debunks that entire experiment. He claimed Mickey D's is what fucked up his liver when, obviously. That's not me mocking someone for having an addiction, by the way, but he never mentioned the fact that he was a heavy drinker in that documentary, and not mentioning that is very misleading. But back to the letter, he opens up about his depression, and regarding the sexual harassment, he considerably says that it wasn't the gropey, feely kind of harassment, just the verbal kind, like calling his female employees hot pants or sex pants. Toward the end, he says that the woman he sexually harassed threatened to expose what he'd done if he didn't pay her a settlement. And, God, I wonder why he felt the need to include that detail. Who can say? He ends the letter saying that he is also part of the solution. But I am also part of the solution. By recognizing and openly admitting what I've done to further this terrible situation, I hope to empower change within myself. We should all find the courage to admit we're at fault. More than anything, I'm hopeful that I can start to rebuild the trust and the respect of those I love most. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I will work every day to earn it back. I will do better. I will be better. I believe we all can. The only individual I have control over is me. So starting today, I'm going to be more honest with you and myself. I'm going to lay it all out in the open. Maybe that will be a start. Who knows? But I do know I've talked enough in my life. I'm finally ready to listen.
So, okay, this is my little radar is going off because this is a man saying that he was accused of sexual assault when actually it was just an honest misunderstanding. It's not every one of these cases, but in a lot of these cases, when you hear from the dude and he describes it as a harmless misunderstanding, honest mistake thing, you need to also hear from the woman.
Yep. And I will say, I didn't find anything where we hear from this particular woman. In one interview, he said he, quote unquote, hadn't heard from her.
Okay.
He describes this thing and he goes, "Oh, I was trying to make her feel better. I was trying to comfort her." But he's also describing a woman who is crying and telling him she does not want to have sex. And then he's like, and then we started having sex.
Yeah.
He's describing this as if he is being a good guy. And there's also a reading of what he reports on here that is extremely not him being a good guy.
Yeah.
So the women Morgan is talking about in this letter have not come forward. We have not heard from them, and as Michael Hobbs said in that clip, it is always important to get the woman's side of the story when a man is clearly downplaying a sexual encounter he had with a woman. It's a common and predictable thing that is very prevalent in abusers. Aside from the fake self-awareness performance, watering down the details to not only make themselves seem less shitty, but also to cast doubt among their victims. Morgan doesn't say he did anything exactly, he just says that she felt like she was raped. He says he's part of the problem, but he doesn't even say oh, I realized I'd coerced her. Notice how he pats himself on the back for openly admitting to what he's done. This is how he can avoid being labeled a predator while also looking like he's taking responsibility. Lastly, on Morgan, please, you guys, understand that when a man responds to Me Too by saying, "Oh no, are they gonna come for me?" is weird and a red flag, and is not a concern that we need to validate. Just because men were scared during Me Too doesn't mean those fears were valid. Your fear of possibly being outed should not be the thing you put in your letter about being part of the solution, even if you genuinely felt that way. During the release of Straight Outta Compton, poor Dr. Dre was forced to respond to his past history of abuse, at least according to the New York Times article that published his half-assed apology. As with Hugo, we have a collective disappointment in men so intense that any crumb feels like a meal. But people only decide to put on their detective eye when it comes to the victims. It's their words that get nitpicked, even when their side of the story is more credible and not vague as fuck. They'll have witnesses and photo evidence and text messages and email exchanges sometimes, and y'all will still be dick riding for men who say shit like this in response to whether or not they're a pedophile.
The allegations are that you took Dylan into a attic or crawl space, that you touched her in her private part. Is there any truth to that at all?
Look, be logical about this. I'm 57. Isn't it illogical that I'm going to, at the height of a very bitter, acrimonious custody fight, drive up to Connecticut where nobody likes me in the house. I'm with a house full of enemies. I mean, Mia was so enraged at me, and she had gotten all the kids to be angry at me, that I'm going to drive up there and suddenly on visitation, pick this moment in my life to become a child molester. It's just incredible. If I wanted to be a child molester, I had many opportunities in the past. I could have quietly made a custody settlement with Mia in some way and done it in the future. I mean, it's so insane.
See, some of them complimented the bravery of the women coming forward, which made it look like they were in support of Me Too, and the victims of the men being outed. Louis C.K. and some of the women who came forward against him do say that he would ask them. In the New York Times piece that broke this story, two of the women who came forward, Dana Min Goodman and Julia Wolof, recall an incident in 2002 where Louis C.K. asked them if he could ejaculate in front of them. They thought he was joking and gave him a thumbs up, but jokingly, and they were shocked when he actually started doing it. And when he came, just asked which one of them was Julia or Dana. Another woman, Rebecca Corey, says in 2005 that he asked her if he could masturbate in front of her. She said no and brought up the fact that at the time he was married and his wife was pregnant. According to her, his face got red, and then he expressed how he had issues. Going further back to the late 1990s, another woman, who at the time was only about 21 years old and was working on the set of The Chris Rock Show, was consistently asked by Louis C.K. if he could masturbate in front of her. She says she went along with it, but felt uneasy afterward. It was something that I knew was wrong, said the woman, who described sitting in Louis C.K.'s office while he masturbated on his desk chair during a workday. Other colleagues just outside the door. I think the big piece of why I said yes was because of the culture, she continued. He abused his power. A coworker at the Chris Rock Show, who also wished to remain anonymous, confirmed that the woman told him about the experience soon after it happened. When these women's allegations finally got attention after Me Too, Louis C.K. responded the next day. And here's what he had to say. These stories are true. At the time, I said to myself that what I did was okay, because I never showed a woman my dick without asking first, which is also true. But what I learned later in life, too late, is that when you have power over another person, asking them to look at your dick isn't a question, it's a predicament for them. The power I had over these women is that they admired me, and I wielded that power irresponsibly. I have been remorseful of my actions, and I've tried to learn from them and run from them. Now I'm aware of the extent of the impact of my actions. I learned yesterday the extent to which I left these women who admire me feeling badly about themselves and cautious around other men who would never have put them in that position. I also took advantage of the fact that I was widely admired in my and their community, which disabled them from sharing their story and brought hardship to them when they tried, because people who look up to me didn't want to hear it. I didn't think that I was doing any of that because my position allowed me not to think about it. There's nothing about this that I forgive myself for, and I have to reconcile it with who I am, which is nothing compared to the task I left them with. I wish I had reacted to their admiration of me by being a good example to them as a man and given them some guidance as a comedian, including because I admired their work. I have spent my long and lucky career talking and saying anything I want. I will now step back and take a long time to listen. Thank you for reading. Okay, so he gets points for citing his admirability as the reason these women felt afraid to come forward and that there was a power dynamic. Louis highlights at the opening of this statement that he did get consent, and because he got consent, thought it was okay. But that is bullshit. Something Rebecca Corey said in a letter she wrote for Vulture was that he knew what he was doing was wrong. Bill Cosby and Louis C.K. may not be on the same level of terrible in terms of their behavior, but they both made their secret sexual transgressions a focal point of their comedy.
For all the times he was willing to tell us everything about who he was and tell us about his foibles, there was still this one part of himself that he was holding back. And, that goes back to the discussion of, is a comedian just a joke teller, or are they a truth teller? Are the jokes supposed to be the truth, or are the jokes just jokes?
Some of these women say he did apologize privately, and by apology, I mean he gestures at an apology and told them that he had issues, and wow, triggering. That doesn't sound like someone who didn't know what he was doing was wrong. See, if he says, well, I just didn't know you shouldn't do that as a boss. I'm sorry. Is going to sadly appeal to his fans and those who want to hold on to him, because now we can infantilize the pitiful baby man and deride the evil women trying to ruin his career, even though their careers were the ones that were ruined.
I'm just a girl in love. La 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 lovey-dove. I can't be held responsible for my actions. She's an ingenue.
And that's the biggest problem with this statement. It is very self-pitying, something that would continue in his stand-up after the story became widespread knowledge. He doesn't say why it is wrong to try and fortify your own personal problems and self-hatred against people who were extremely inappropriate with, like that alone, but also some of them who you exposed yourself to. He doesn't acknowledge that he probably relished the power he had over these women, or the fact that he helped promote other female comedians as a way to make them feel indebted to him. And to add insult to injury, he doesn't even mention how these women's careers and lives were kind of ruined because they wanted to tell people what he had subjected them to. If you're truly sorry, if you're so remorseful, you should be able to express remorse over the fact that what you did fucked them over.
How is 2018 and 19 for you guys?
Wait, what? It was different than what his apology was. He framed it as a kink.
He never talked about the repercussions for the women, but he talked a lot about the repercussions for himself. Now the whole world knows my weird sexual hang-up.
I like jerking off. I don't like being alone. That's all I can tell you. I get lonely. Where is everyone? It's just sad.
Oh, I'm just lonely. Take pity on me.
Oh, boo-hoo! Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin. This is serious.
Like with everything else we've been discussing, many people, his fans, other comedians, did not take this very seriously, which really lays bare how far we still have to go in our understanding of consent and sexual harassment. Because I don't understand why it's so difficult to understand why what Louis C.K. did was deeply wrong on so many levels. Are you telling me that if your boss called you into their office and asked you if you wanted to watch them jerk off, that wouldn't disturb the shit out of you? That wouldn't make you feel uncomfortable and uneasy because, they're your boss and, you could possibly be, I don't know, fired, depending on your answer? Going back to Barry, there's literally an episode where Sally is getting ready for this audition, and she meets with her agent, who makes a clearly not joking comment about how when it comes to his clients, he doesn't know if he wants to sign them or fuck them.
I'd really like to keep this professional.
That was totally a joke.
Kidding. Yeah, no,
I thought you knew that.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, of course.
And what do you know? He instantly drops her after this. Because even though people love to tell you about how you should always stand up for yourself, we grow up with the false notion that standing up for yourself is the end-all be-all of all of our problems, when for a lot of people, it's the beginning. All she said was that she wanted to keep this professional. She could have said something way worse, and then she apologized continuously when she didn't even do anything wrong. Verbal harassment is also still awful, but to expose herself to someone is on another level to me, because like with Dana and Julia, the reason they didn't leave is because they froze. Like they thought he was joking, then he stripped naked and went at it. I can imagine myself being frozen in that situation and not knowing what to do. In the 2023 documentary Sorry Not Sorry about Louis C.K., his sexual misconduct, they called of silence around him and other famous men, and they deconstruct this bullshit about Louis C.K. being canceled, even though he was back on stage not even a year after all this happened. They show clips of comedians like Dave Chappelle, Joe Rogan, and feminist icon Kurt Metzger downplaying the seriousness of these stories. There's a clip they show of Dave during one of his comedy specials joking about Abby Schachner, who called Louis C.K. in 2003 and heard him close the blinds, and then eventually realized he was playing with himself. Something Dave Chappelle says is, what, you can't hang up the phone? And it is that right there that I want to focus on. Because it doesn't matter if they stayed on the line. It doesn't matter if Dana and Julia jokingly consented, because it's on jokingly, they didn't actually believe he was going to do that. None of that matters, because it doesn't change the fact that Louis C.K. asked them to do that in the fucking first place. It doesn't change the fact that Louis C.K. stripped naked in front of these women and jerked off. It doesn't change the fact that one woman who worked on the Chris Rock show with him and who chose to remain anonymous, gee, wonder why, says he repeatedly asked her if she wanted to watch him, and she finally acquiesced. If you are a manager or a CEO, if you have a position that places you near the top or the top of the hierarchy at whatever job you're at, you absolutely know better. In his stand-up special from 2021, mind you, 3.5 years after this happened, he doubled down on his actions by reducing it to just being a lonely old sap with a weird fetish. Accountability to me would be him criticizing the people who dismiss his misconduct as not that bad. The people treating him like a poor baby who has endured so much pain from the choices he made as a grown-ass fucking adult.
You just see a man that's like zero fucks given. Do you feel like because of what you've endured, we transcended?
Accountability would be him reflecting on how his own politics or self-purported politics that seemed empathetic toward women contradicted how he was actually treating the women in his life, including his wife. And while we're still on the subject of men who did really shitty things and gave half-assed apologies, Dr. Dre. After Straight Outta Compton, a biopic about the 1990s rap group NWA came out, and Dee Barnes reminded the public of what he did to her and other women, and how that was omitted from the biopic that he produced. He came out to say that he is sorry to these women and deeply regrets what he did, crediting his alcoholism for his erratic behavior. For some reason informs us that he's been married for 19 years, says he's working on himself, will never be that way again, and that he knows this had an impact on all of our lives. By all of our lives, he means their lives, because he's doing fine. He doesn't specifically name the women like Michelet or D. Barnes or Terry B. Doesn't elaborate on what kind of hurt he caused or how after the D. Barnes case, he went on to make jokes about it in his music, including Eminem. It says nothing of the fact that D. Barnes, who was just doing her job, lost her job, was blacklisted from Hollywood, tried to live a regular life, but struggled to find employment because of the stigma attached to her name. And in a Rolling Stone article from 2023, revealed that she was unhoused for about 3 years before finally getting back on her feet. Meanwhile, Dr. Dre is a millionaire and is still beloved and celebrated in the hip-hop community. How lovely. All of these women, regardless of the degree of harm they've experienced, have been blamed, shamed, and bullied. Told that they were ruining a man's career, that they just wanted money, they just want attention and fame. And almost all of these women didn't get any of those things. They suffered the consequences that people attribute to these men. They were the ones who were canceled. This is why cancel culture discussions are so vexing to me, because everyone is talking about something different. And then the people who complain the most about cancel culture have never actually suffered, nor has their beloved status diminished all that much. And what I've noticed based on the things I've learned about the past is that it's usually women of color, fat people, trans people, gay people, non-binary people, getting canceled for standing up against bigotry or speaking out about misconduct, saying the wrong thing on social media and people viciously turning on you. Child stars like Nathan Forrest Winters was not allowed to have a shot in Hollywood because he was sexually assaulted by a grown adult man who is still working in Hollywood today as a registered sex offender.
This sort of ability to speculate about what all could have happened to the many, 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 many people who have suffered at the hands of these men is long, and the longer you think about it, the harder it is to really care what art these men make. Because there's a whole bunch of artists who didn't get to do anything as a result of either the incident having happened and they've got a lot of PTSD over it, or they were literally not hired because they were prevented from getting jobs.
I'll never forget watching in an interview after he wrote a book and was talking about how much money he spent. Mm-hmm. In defense of that. And I almost came up out my skin. I was like, really?
Yeah. No.
How much money you spent?
Yeah.
But you got to go on with your life and be revered everywhere. I've watched him walk through places like a rock star.
Yeah.
So you get to say whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's what you carry. And I know what you carry. Whew, Jesus. That shit pissed me off so bad. Oh my God. Because if somebody did that to my baby, I would be, you could not, I would be hunting that motherfucker down.
I think my parents
I'm sure.
felt that way.
I'm so sure.
You know, it's
you want to talk about how much money you spent? And my child had to go into hiding?
How is it cancel culture when many of the people who worked with some of these men knew what was going on, silenced the victims, and then chose their perpetrator over them? People are more willing to work with someone they know is an abuser or sex pest or predator, and are even more willing to weed out anybody who will shine a light on this conspiracy of silence that is at play. How is it cancel culture when the public, including the Black community, supports and defends a man who they watched on tape urinating on a 14-year-old girl, a Black girl, and just years before married a different 14-year-old girl when he was almost 30 years old? How is it cancel culture when Christine Blasey Ford has to move 4 times because of people harassing her online and tweeting out her address? Christine bared her fucking soul and told a very heartbreaking and traumatic story for nothing. She did that for nothing. And she is the one who was punished. Same with Susie Hardy, who accused Ryan Seacrest of sexual harassment and misconduct. Specifically, she says he was constantly hitting on her. He groped her vagina at one point, gave her an uncomfortably long bear hug, invited her to his house late at night once, which she declined, would hug her while in his underwear, smacked her on the butt so hard that it left a red welt. There's one incident where she says he told her that he didn't think she was attracted to him. And she said, "I'm attracted to my paycheck," which... yeah, exactly. She was a single mom and she desperately needed that job. Men being accused of something is not canceling them. Just because people come out against them and a small portion of the public responds by denouncing him or they lose their job on a TV show or something doesn't mean they're being canceled. By saying these people are being canceled, we take the pity and empathy that should be directed at their victims and turns the men into victims of cancel culture and treat that victimization as more detrimental than the actual canceling of their victims. That's not to say you can't empathize with these men, but this is not empathy, it's sympathy. And I'll elaborate on that soon. But I asked, why would you, for one, sympathize more with someone who hasn't changed and isn't totally honest about what they've done? And 2, Why can't you do both? Why is it either or? Because I can empathize with anyone, but that doesn't mean I'm going to patronize them, overlook the scope of their actions, and then go and attack their accusers. Now, I know some people may feel like I'm being harsh on these men and I'm nitpicking their statements and not being fair, but you're wrong. Because there is a man who has properly demonstrated what it actually looks like to take accountability. In 2018, writer and showrunner Dan Harmon, creator of Community and Rick and Morty, put out a very raw and honestly very uncomfortable but honest confession and apology to Megan Gans, who worked as a writer on Community. In this statement coming from his podcast, Harmontown, he says, quote, "I was attracted to an employee. I really want to be really careful about that language, because a huge part of the problem is a culture of feeling things that you think are unique, insignificant because they are happening to you, and saying things like, I had feelings for and I fell for and all these things. The most clinical way I can put it in fessing up to my crimes is that I was attracted to a writer that I had power over because I was a showrunner, and I knew enough to know that these feelings were bad news. That was easy enough to know. I knew that they ran the risk of undercutting people's faith in my judgment, her faith in her talent, the other writers' respect of me, the entire production, the audience. I knew that I wasn't doing anybody any favors by feeling these things, and so I did the cowardly, easiest, laziest thing you could do with feelings like that. And I didn't deal with them. And in not dealing with them, I made everybody else deal with them, especially her." He admits to lying to his girlfriend at the time, who correctly suspected that he had feelings for Megan. Dan says if you can lie to yourself, you can lie to anybody. And so that's what I continue to do, telling myself and anybody that threatened to confront me with it that if you thought what I was doing was creepy or flirty or unprofessional, then it's because you were the sexist. You were jealous. I was supporting this person. I'm a mentor. I'm a feminist. It's your problem, not mine, that you're the one who's seeing things through that lens. And so I let myself keep doing it. It's not as if this person didn't repeatedly communicate to me the idea that what I was doing was divesting her of a recourse to integrity. I just didn't hear it because it didn't profit me to hear it. And this was, after all, happening to me. Dan admits to breaking up with his girlfriend as a means to make himself feel less like a bad person. And his harassment of Megan went into overdrive. Now I wasn't in danger of being a bad person. And then after that season, I got overt about my feelings because it was wrapped, and I said, I love you. And she said the same thing she'd been saying the entire time in one language or another. Please don't you understand that focusing on me like this, liking me like this, preferring me like this, I can't say no to it. And when you do it, it makes me unable to know whether I'm good at my job. And that is also such a great point. Women who are in these situations might begin to feel self-conscious because now they're wondering, did he only hire me because he's attracted to me? Does he actually think I'm good at my job? Or does he just like having someone to harass? One of the hardest parts of this confession for me to read was him admitting to retaliating against her or rejecting him after he'd bluntly told her he loved her. Wanting to teach her a lesson, as he says, he treated her as if she was expendable, being cruel and resentful towards her, and concedes that he absolutely would not have done it if she was a man. And I lied to myself the entire time about it, and I lost my job. I ruined my show, I betrayed the audience, I destroyed everything, and I damaged her internal compass, and I moved on. And I never did it before, and I will never do it again. But I certainly wouldn't have been able to do it if I had any respect for women on a fundamental level. I was thinking about them as different creatures. I was thinking about the ones that I liked as having some special role in my life. And I did it all by not thinking about it. These men say in their statements how they didn't think critically about their behavior toward women. But Dan is the only one to me so far who seems to actually mean it, because he says that he wouldn't have had to sit with this had she not talked about this on Twitter, and ends this statement imploring readers to really think about this stuff, because if you don't, you're going to get away with not thinking about it. And I just think that is so poignant. This is what I was saying about how victimizing these men who victimized others prevents them from being able to sit with their actions and consider the humanity of the women in their lives. How can we learn anything and possibly attempt to be better if people are loudly expressing how what he did wasn't that deep? Now, Dan doesn't specifically state Megan's name, but he does something that none of these men have done, which is urge people to leave her the fuck alone and to not direct more hatred towards her than him. I mean, part of this that really sticks with me is the lack of self-pitying bullshit. Dan is condemning his action. He is not defending it with, oh, I had a bad childhood, or oh, I was a loser in high school and couldn't resist, or I had a drinking problem. He does talk about abusing alcohol and pills, but he's not blaming the alcohol and pills on what he did. He is owning the fact that his treatment of her stems from misogyny and not seeing women as people. Dan had to see Megan as a person in order to realize how awful his actions were. And that is the difference between empathy and sympathy. The way people defend these men is not about being empathetic, it's being sympathetic. In my Thin People Cosplaying Fat People video, I talked about how the concerned trolling that is lobbied at fat people is sympathy, in the sense that you pity fat people and look at them as dying dogs. And that is what's happening with Louis C. K and others. Empathy is when you stop putting that person on some pedestal and look at them as a regular, full human being who was flawed, not some genius. Someone who is clearly not well, possibly has past trauma that can help you understand what led them here, but that doesn't mean you are excusing their behavior. You're just trying to understand it. Sympathizing with abusers and predators and sex pests who aren't being honest and are not genuinely remorseful is not going to make the world a better place.
I love Louis, but Louis did these things. Both of those statements are true. So I just keep asking myself, can you love someone who did bad things? Can you still love them? I can mull that over later, certainly, because the only people that matter right now are the victims. They are victims, and they're victims because of something he did.
Michael Ian Black, who appeared in the Sorry Not Sorry doc, recounted this tweet he put out saying how we'll have to figure out how the men who are caught up in the Me Too chaos can earn redemption. Once again, like I said, in separating the art from the artist, our heroes being redeemed is more important than what they did, more important than the victims. People are obsessed with redemption narratives when it comes to men. There's a piece Hugo Schweizer wrote for his Substack, where he reviewed one of my favorite books, My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, about a young millennial woman coming to terms with the fact that she was preyed upon and groomed by her high school English teacher after another woman accuses him of sexual assault. I'm going to spoil some things, so skip ahead if you don't want to hear this, but the story takes place in the context of Me Too and how Me Too is what helped her realize what happened to her and her struggling to see herself as a true victim. It is truly one of the best books I've ever read, and I highly recommend, though it is very graphic. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. It's graphic. The story ends with the teacher dying by suicide, and this irked Hugo. Wonder why. His argument is essentially that it would be nice if bad men could be redeemed instead of killed off. And to be fair, this is something that is raised in The Will to Change. Bell Hooks discusses how movies that do redeem bad men usually end with the men dying as a form of redemption. I should very much like to read a novel about a professor who crosses the proverbial line and loses his job. I should very much like to have that be towards the beginning of the damn book, so that we can see him work through his redemptive arc. I should very much like to see him contemplate suicide and choose otherwise. He stands at the cliff's edge and backs away. He accelerates towards the pond and hits the brakes. He finds a way to live with disgrace, to make amends, to rebuild, to transform. He wounds her, but she's the one who heals, while he dies from the shame or the guilt. I love how he says he wounds her, but she's the one who heals, as if that's not fair. Like, what the fuck are you even talking about, Hugo? This story is about a woman learning that she was groomed by her teacher. The story is told from her perspective. It's not about a man redeeming himself after preying on teenage girls. And it doesn't have to be that every fucking movie about rape culture needs to make men look good so men don't feel bad. My Dark Vanessa is about a woman unpacking the fact that just because she was not pinned down and forcibly assaulted doesn't mean she was not victimized by this man. It's about this concept of what a real victim is and how that concept can keep women minimizing the things that have happened to them, and even victim blaming other women who have been in similar situations. This was the same attitude that some male critics directed at Promising Young Woman, a movie that is equally, if not way worse, to the female characters than the men, criticized for making men look bad. If you want more stories about men redeeming themselves, then men should go and write those stories. It's not a woman's job nor a survivor's job to make sure to not hurt men's feelings when talking about something that affects 1 in 4 women, especially when there is no way for women to tell these stories without being criticized or being anti-men. Oh, but don't worry, Hugo already knew what I was going to say. I can already anticipate the reviews if I scribbled out a novel based in part on my own life. If I was too hard on myself, they'd call it tedious and self-abasing. If I absolved myself, I'd be accused of a complete lack of responsibility and introspection. And I'd be told over and over again that we already have too many stories about aging white men on heroic journeys. It is time for us dirty old men to fall silent, to live out whatever redemption arc we can manage in a way that doesn't take attention away from the folks whose voices matter more. The world may not want me to kill myself, but it isn't keen to hear my story either. Fuck you. This is what I mean when I've said that he seemingly understands why it was wrong to sleep with his college students, because, like, why did you have to read an incredibly dark story about the grooming of an underage girl and her grappling with that reality and then make it about you? This is internalized dominance in action, because he sounds so resentful when what he is saying is not true. If he came out with a book saying dumb shit like this, I think he'd be fine and people would still like him because he's a cis white man. But I guess I'm being abusive if I say that. I understand wanting more of these narratives. I get to some degree wishing there was some kind of path these men could take to better themselves. And it's not even wrong to want them to, but they have to want to change. That's why her book is called The Will to Change. As much as she empathizes with men, she still wants men to make an active effort to divest from patriarchy. What we have seen is that most of these men are not willing to change. They can't even specifically state what it is that they did, and some of them double down on it. Not to be bleak or a negative Nancy or to sound like a man hater, but most people who are abusive, who have sexually assaulted people, don't change because change is hard. It is hard work that these men have not done. But we have decided that putting out a statement is the change, when it's not. We need to raise our standards.
And he came out and he said, I did this. He said, I did these things. These women are all telling the truth. And I just remember thinking, well, that's the sign of somebody who, well, we can work with that. You know what I mean? Like, that's, you know, what the hell else are you supposed to do?
If Dr. Dre had truly changed, he would have helped Dee Barnes get her career back and scold his fans along with other men in the hip-hop community for discrediting and mocking not just a woman, but a black woman who he viciously attacked. The Dee Barnes incident didn't need to be reenacted, but omitting it doesn't sound to me that you've changed or that you regret hurting these women, because omitting their trauma is also hurtful to them. Dr. Dre did not change, and he probably never will, because why would he? People still love him and support him and promote him. I've suffered no repercussions for what I've done, and shit, people still love me, so why change? In his incredible book, Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men by Lundy Bancroft, there's a chapter where they talk about the denial and dismissiveness of abusers. One of my areas of specialization is court-related work involving abusers who are physically violent or who abuse their children. I frequently encounter personnel who say, well, she accuses him of abusing her, but he denies. They then drop the matter as if the man's denial closes the case. They also tell me, he says he does the same things to him, so I guess they abuse each other. This kind of denial and cross-accusation tells us nothing about whether the woman is telling the truth. If the man is abusive, of course he's going to deny it, partly to protect himself and partly because his perceptions are distorted. If he were ready to accept responsibility for his actions in a relationship, he wouldn't be abusive. Most of the men in my group admit to some abusive behavior, although they don't see it as abuse, of course, but they acknowledge only a small portion of what they have actually done, as I learn when I interview the abused partners. None of this is to say that we shouldn't still advocate for redemption or change, but I don't think focusing on famous male figures is how we're going to make widespread change. Louis C.K. famously joked about how men are the #1 threat to women, and the sad thing is, he wasn't completely wrong. According to the World Health Organization, globally 1 in 3 women have experienced intimate partner violence. This is literally one of the main reasons why women are killed, which includes emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. No, that doesn't mean men are not victims of DV, they are. But statistically speaking, men are more likely to be violent and abusive towards other people, not just women. But me saying that should not make you start banging on your keyboard about how I'm a misandrist. As a wise woman once said, these are just facts. These are not my feelings. I don't want this to be true. Do men think that women sit around celebrating how 1 in 3 women experience this? Because we don't. And this problem won't be fixed by redeeming a bunch of bad men whose work we want to consume without shame.
That leads, I mean, it's what you all came for, folks. The fucking incident.
Well, I think the key was to not play him or to think of him as a villain. Because these men, these people who cause harm, don't think of themselves that way. It's quite the opposite.
Wow,
actually.
that's interesting.
So it was very intentional to also make sure that we were protecting Lily throughout the process by making sure Ryle was likable. Because the movie hinges on this relationship working and there being real love and real romance and real passion there. Because that is what happens in real life. It's a fine line because I in no way was this movie designed to ever ask an audience to feel empathy for an abuser.
Right.